Hello everyone. I hope all of you are doing well, and I'm very sure that all of you must have prepared well for your CLAT examination also, because now not much time is left for your D-Day, that is 7th of December, right? But yes, every time we come up with a certain, you can say, last time tips, or probably this is the time when students generally have that sense of urgency, because now they know that it's a do or a die situation. But yes, just be aware, it's not a die situation, right? It's a do situation only for all the students. So just keep that in mind. I will today, as you know, that today it's a CLAT marathon, and we will be talking about verbal ability today. So this is CLAT VA marathon, which we have explicitly brought for you, so that all your fears, right, so they come down, and all your hopes, they go up, right? So you have already done well, you've already prepared well, you've taken the classes, right? So you've as in maybe solved ample practice material so far, so you don't have to worry about anything. As I said, we'll be coming up with some last minute tips, or maybe the final as in 2 weeks, or the final 1 week preparation, how you can go about that. And we will also talk about certain strategies that we need to follow at this moment of time. And there are certain as in maybe questions which might be in your head, that how to solve which kind of RC, right? Which questions to maybe cater to first, which questions to cater to at the end, right? So definitely, yes, we'll be talking about all those things in today's session. But before we start, let's wait for a minute or so that maybe students start joining, and we don't as in have to break the flow of this kind of you can say the conversation, not exactly the conversation, the kind of maybe the points we are discussing on. All right, so let's wait for a minute or so. Until the time, you can just have all those points in your mind, that whatever you want to ask. Although I'll help you out with the help of a PPT, right? So I have tried to as in come up with certain things which probably you might have in your head, right? But you also have to come up with certain questions or certain things which still maybe you feel that hampers your reading speed, right? Or there are certain maybe points wherein you still falter, right? So you can just come up with those questions in between, and I'll try to as an answer as many questions as possible during the session, right, students? Okay, so I suppose without wasting more time, so let's begin with today's session, that's CLAT VA marathon. Right now, let's have an overview of CLAT examination, although I know you don't require it at this moment of time. But just to tell you that, yes, all of you know that it's an examination that's conducted by the consortium of national law universities, right? And this examination, CLAT examination, it started in 2008. Right, and before that probably there were different as an NLUs who would conduct it on a rotational basis, right? So why was this CLAT as in started? Right, CLAT was started to basically centralize the entire process, as it's written over there, to centralize the entire process and give every student one exam for multiple NLUs. So what did it do then? Right, it created a standardized, fair and transparent admission process which ensured same exam for all, merit list generated by a central body, and equal opportunity for all irrespective of the location they come from, regardless of their location, right? So this was just about CLAT examination, because you are setting for CLAT, so probably you need to know that when did it happen, when did it start and all. So CLAT VA layout we'll talk about, because this is a VA marathon. Now in CLAT VA section, verbal ability section, see, you must be knowing that CLAT examination overall you have 120 questions. It's a multiple choice question paper. You have 120 questions, you have 120 minutes, and there are more or less 5 sections which you have to cater to. Right, one is verbal ability, that is your English section. Then you have logical reasoning, you have quantitative techniques, that's your quantitative aptitude. Then you have legal reasoning, right? Also, and you have GK also. So you have 120 minutes for all the 5 sections, right? So there is no sectional time limit as such, you must be knowing that. But when I talk about VA section, so more or less there are 22 to 26 questions which you have to cater to. And all of them are entirely based on reading comprehension. They are application based questions, right? Now passages, what would be the length of the passages? It would be more or less 400 to 450 words, because that is what the consortium of NLUs tells us, right? So question types would be inference based questions, structure based questions, arguments, legal awareness, literature type, right? And what skill would be as in tested? Definitely yes, it would be comprehension, it would be reasoning, it would be vocabulary in context, right? Now what we are going to do today, what are the session's objectives? Let's have a look at that. So first we'll try to understand CLAT patterns, although we'll not spend much time on this because this is not something very important for you at this moment of time, right? But yes, we'll just have an overview of it. Then next we will learn scoring strategies. So this is something which is very important for me, right? As a student, I want to sit in CLAT examination with the motive to crack it with good score, right? So that is basically my motive, to as in sit for the CLAT examination. And this is something which all of us, I would say all the students are catering to. They want to know that how they can use their strategies to score better, to score well, right? So the next thing that we will do in today's session, we'll solve some moderately tough passages, right? Because if we talk about the actual CLAT examination also, see, per se, if I talk about any entrance examination, you will never find any examination really very tough, especially when I talk about PA section. It has to be moderately tough. At times it's moderately easy also, right? Because whenever you talk of entrance examinations, you will see that they are always unpredictable. They're always uncertain. So there's no predictability as such, right? That is something which we are going to do today in the class, and let's see that how many of us are able to solve how many passages with how much time like we'll be giving to a particular passage, and how many questions will we be able to solve correctly, right? Next thing, we'll have a revision blueprint for the final weeks, right? So we know that we are as in left with very less time, but yes, even if we are left with maybe 10 days or 15 days, so I say 15 days and 15 nights, right? So that makes it 1 month. All right, you have to take care of your health also. Please don't do anything that tells upon your health, right? So you have to take proper sleep, you have to take proper diet. That is something which you have to keep in mind. All right, so students, let's come to the first slide. This talks about how CLAT VA has shifted over the years, right? So as I said, we are not really interested in what happened till 2024 now, because that's already gone, right? Now just an overview. Earlier, if you would look at CLAT VA as in section, there would be grammar questions also, vocabulary questions also, reading comprehension also, but then there was a major redesign. And in 2022, right, this in fact 2000 in 2020 itself, you could see that there was a major redesign, and CLAT examination VA section would only have the reading comprehensions, right? But those reading comprehensions, they were as in long RCs, right? So which probably checked your reading stamina, that how long you can sit on a passage and understand it. Because see, most of the times this is one particular thing what students generally feel कि भाई लंबा पैसेज है, बहुत लंबा पैसेज है, मैम पढ़ना ही नहीं है. So never ever feel that if a passage is long, I might not or I should not read it. Why? Because I might not be in a position to understand it, or it might take me a longer time. See, what takes a longer time? What takes longer time to read a passage? It's not reading the words or the sentences or the phrases. It's basically understanding the thoughts, understanding those phrases, understanding those sentences. So see, we generally talk about, see, let me talk to you in this manner. We talk about two things. We talk about horizontal reading and we talk about vertical reading. Now when I talk about these two things, horizontal reading and vertical reading, you might be a little baffled that what is this horizontal reading and what is this vertical reading. So when we read in any language except for Urdu, that we read from right to left, generally we read from left to right. So this is the horizontal reading. So most of us do the horizontal reading, definitely yes, right? But this depends upon our eye span, right? How many words we are able to recognize in one particular go. That is my span of recognition, that is my eye span. So maybe in a particular sentence, if I am able to, you can say, gather the information from a particular phrase, right, in one go, and gather the information from the second phrase in another go, that means for me, I might take little less time than the person who takes the information from that one sentence in 3 goes. Are you getting me? So if there's a sentence with say 10 words or 9 words, right? So I was able to read those 9 words, probably understand those 9 words, the information those 9 words or those phrases were giving me. I was able to understand that in 2 phrases, right? So my span of recognition was this and this. For another person, it was this, this, and this, right? So his span of recognition was more than that of mine. Making sense? So that depends, that basically leads to my speed. So if I have a bigger you can say span of recognition, my speed will automatically increase. If I have a lesser span of recognition, my speed will automatically decrease. So when I am reading horizontally, I am basically taking the information, I am taking the idea, I am taking the thought from that particular sentence, rather than reading a particular word individually and trying to understand it. Right? So all of us, I know, are very good readers, we are avid readers, right? So I'm very sure that none of us actually reads a particular word and tries to get the information from that word. So we read horizontally. But now you might ask me, what is vertical reading? How can one person read vertically? So when I talk about vertical reading, I'm saying reading from up to down. That means for that you need to be such a good reader that for you one sentence is basically one thought for you, right? So what you're trying to do, you're trying to gather the information and comprehend that information that is given in one particular line in just one go. You're doing that, right? So for you, if you are taking the information probably from this sentence in one go, and then you're taking the information from the next sentence in one go, third sentence in one go, so you are no more reading horizontally, now you're reading vertically. Now, this is a very difficult process, and I would say that not all of us are vertical readers, but yes, there are people who read a lot of stuff for years together, then they probably become the vertical readers because their vocabulary becomes so sound that they are able to catch the ideas like anything. Right? So that is what basically one has to become if one wants to as in do well in the examinations, because we know in the examinations time is always a constraint. Right, students? So this is what I am saying, when this CLAT shifted to long RCs, it was checking your high reading stamina. So we should have the stamina, even if now if there are maybe 400 words ka passage or 450 words ka passage. So if you are reading maybe 5 passages, you know that you have to read a lot. So your stamina anyways has to be good. So you need to build up that stamina. तो ऐसा मत सोचो कि छोटा पैसेज है तो पढ़ना है, लंबा है तो नहीं पढ़ना है. आप 4 पैसेजेस मिलके पढ़ रहे हो तब भी you have to read a lot. Right? So your stamina has to be good, and you have to build that stamina. Right? All right. So then afterwards, what happened? It shifted to shorter RCs with a harder logic, and now there was CR inside the RCs. So nowadays, if you look at the CLAT passages, it's more or less like a critical reasoning passage in which there are lots of arguments, lots of assumptions. The premises are there, you have to infer so many things, right? You have to come up with the assumptions, right? So CR is embedded in the reading comprehensions nowadays in CLAT examination, and as it was expected in 2025 that there would be CR dominant RC, and that is what actually happened, right? So now what they test the meaning and logic, right? And they want you to smartly eliminate the options, right? They want you to have the abstract understanding of the passage. Now, CLAT wants you to understand the passages which are abstract, which are unclear, which are esoteric, right? So that that means you should have ample information about any field. You cannot say that I am a commerce student, how come I am able to decode the scientific terminology, right? Or maybe I'm a science student, I am not able to decode the legal terminology. You cannot say that, right? Because CLAT wants you to have the abstract understanding of the subject, and it also wants you to do the smart elimination of the options which are not my correct answers, and thus leading you to the correct answer. All right, students, so this was about the pattern. So let me move to the next slide. All right, now the next slide talks about learning scoring strategies. All right, now see, how do we learn the scoring strategy? Now, the first thing you have to do is target the certain passages or questions first. Now, I come across the BA section, right? I have maybe 25 questions in front of me, or I have 22 questions or 26 questions in front of me, or maybe as per last year, I have 24 questions in front of me, right? With probably 5 passages. Now, how do I start? Do I start as in with the first passage going to the next and then going to the third and the fourth and the fifth? Probably no. Why? Because my interest area might lie in maybe 3 of the passages, and there might be 2 passages which the subject of which I am not well versed with, right? So the first and the foremost thing is that I'll skim through the passages quickly, right? I'll skim through the passages quickly just to know, just to have a hang of the passage, that what the passage is trying to talk about, what is the subject of the passage, right? And once I do that, now I know passage 1 or probably passage 2 and probably passage 5. These are some of the topics which I am comfortable with, because I have done a lot of practice related to these topics. Maybe one of them is related to environment, right? Maybe the second one is related to ethics. And maybe the third one, the fifth one, which I am about to, is related with, say, law and society. Right? So out of these 5 passages, I was able to gauge when I skimmed through the passages. When I say skimming, you don't have to read the passage. You just have to skim through it just to know that what the passage is talking about. Is it talking about some company's policy? Is it talking about the climate change at a global level, right? Is it talking about maybe some societal taboos and all, right? So once I get to know about it, I will be able to understand whether I would be able to decode this particular passage as in easily and in less time, right? As I said, depending upon my interest area and depending upon how much I have read about these topics earlier, right? So now I chose 1, 2 and 5. So the first and the foremost thing is that I will do 1, 2 and 5 passage. I'm not saying that I leave the rest. I'll leave 3 and 4 passage. No, I will not leave that. But the first thing I'll do is I'll do passage 1, passage 2 and passage 5 depending upon my interest area, which I have already written over here. All right. So that's what I've written over here. Start with passages where you instantly understand the flow, and you will instantly understand the flow of those passages, as I said, which you are well acquainted with, the subject, the topic of which you are well versed with. All right. Next is attempt fact-based questions first, and then move on to the tone and assumption-based questions. Now, every passage has different types of questions, which we've already discussed in the classes, right? So, if I talk about the types of passages, what types of passages do we have? We have main idea type of, sorry, not passages, questions, I'm saying. Okay. Let me help. All right. So we have main idea type of questions, right? Then we have contextual vocabulary based questions. So all of us know that, but just to reiterate on this point, then we have, you can say, inference based questions. Inference based questions. We have specific detail or specific information questions. Right? Then you have application based questions. Application based questions, which you also call further application questions, right? Then you have tone based questions. All right. So now you know that the types of questions we come across in the reading comprehensions generally are main idea type of questions, contextual vocab type of questions, inference based questions, specific detail questions, application based questions, and tone based questions. Right. Now I have been practicing RCs for quite a long time now, right? And I know that what are the main idea type of questions which generally ask me about the central idea of the passage, or probably it says the passage is primarily concerned with blah blah blah, right? And then you have contextual vocab. Now see, when you talk about main idea type of questions, you know that you need to be as in well aware of the subject of the passage. Once you're aware of the subject of the passage, you have to read the first and the last lines of every paragraph carefully. It will give you a subject, it will give you a subject with certain supporting details, and you get to know that what is the actual subject, what is the actual maybe the purpose of the author to write this particular as in passage, right? So that is the main idea type of a question. Contextual vocabulary questions, again, they I would say are a little easy. They are easier to crack. Why? Because it's contextual vocabulary, right? So even if you do not know the literal meaning of the word, from the context you can figure out the meaning of the word, right? So that is called contextual vocabulary. In the later run, we'll just take one example of each. Then you have inference based question. Now inference based questions are the questions which you should not do at first. You should keep them for the later time. Why? Because you might falter in these questions. But please mind my words, there's a disclaimer. If there is a student who is very good at critical reasoning, who already has that critical bent of mind, and he or she feels that I am very good at cracking inference based questions and tone based questions, then I would say that that student should go for inference and tone based questions first, because ultimately it is your individualistic maybe perspective, your practice, right, and your bent of mind that will help you crack these questions correctly, right? But generally we say, because main idea questions, contextual vocabulary, right, and specific information questions. When you say specific information questions, these type of questions ask you about some specific detail or some specific information from a particular paragraph in the passage. So you don't have to fend much for it. You simply have to go to those relevant lines and figure out the answer. And the answer is already among the options. You just have to, maybe you know the answer also. When you read the options, maybe you know the answer, but you will have to go back. You will have to do the question regression. Why? Because you want to confirm or maybe reconfirm your answer, right? So specific detail questions, contextual vocabulary, and main idea type of questions are the questions that are cracked easily by most of the students. So that is why it is said that they should be done first, right? Then we come to inference based and tone based questions. So they, if you don't have much practice, or if you still as in maybe 20%, 30% you feel that I am not really sure that what should be the tone, right? Then probably you can as I said, you can go to these questions, you can start solving these questions later by taking some more time, right? And then there's application based question. You call them further application based questions also, wherein whatever information you have gathered from a particular passage, you are trying to apply that information to a different scenario. Maybe that depends upon the question, how it is asked. Maybe the question says the author is most likely to disagree with which of the following, right? And if there are 4 options given to you, maybe all those 4 options are, say, haywire. They have nothing to do with the current passage which we are doing. So how do you know that author is going to agree or disagree with which of the following? You know, because you've just read that one paragraph or one passage from a particular author. So you got to know about his style of writing, right? The way probably he portrays the things, and maybe his mindset also to some extent, I would say. So after you've gathered that information, you can use that information and you can apply that in a different scenario. So that is a further application type of question. So just to reiterate what I said, right? I said that main idea kind of questions, specific detail questions, and contextual vocabulary questions should be done first, and inference based questions and tone based questions should be kept for the later run. Now here we have Adiraj Dogra. He says, ma'am, I struggle with statement questions like which of the following are correct, which or which is incorrect, how to improve it. Now beta see, if there's a question which of the following is correct as per the passage and which of the following is incorrect as per the passage, it might be a specific detailed question, right? You need to understand that it might be a specific detailed question. So probably, as I said, one way to do it is, the first and the foremost way to do it is that you have to do the question regression. As I said, you have to go back to that particular paragraph and find out that what was the you can say vocabulary used by the author, right? How he was trying to, as in, give me this information, right? So you can figure out the answer directly because it might be explicitly mentioned over there if it is a specific detail kind of a question, right? That is one way to solve it. Another thing is that it might be an inference based question, right? So every time you read a passage, please keep in mind you have to understand what author is trying to tell you. We basically call it author's test, right? We call this the author's test. So you have to take that author's test. So Adhiraj, what you will do, you will just try to question yourself that would the author be would the author be likely, would he likely agree or disagree with these statements, with this statement? Maybe you take an option and you say, would the author agree with this statement? If yes, then it might be my answer. If no, then it will not be my answer. Why? Because I don't have to give my point of view. Whatever I am doing it from the author's point of view. Adiraj, is it clear? See students, you have to understand one thing. At times we feel that हम ऐसा कहते हैं बहुत बार के अरे मेरे हिसाब से तो यही आंसर होना चाहिए, ऑप्शन सी आंसर होना चाहिए, एंड देन देयर इज अनदर ब्राइट स्टूडेंट हु सेज नहीं, मेरे हिसाब से तो ऑप्शन बी आंसर होना चाहिए. बट वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड वन थिंग, if the answer is C, it is C for everybody, and if the answer is B, it is B for everybody. Now if our interpretation and if our perspective and perception had to play a role, right? Thank you Adiraj. If our perception, as I said, had to play, if our perspective had to play a role, then probably every student would have different answers, right? But that's not the case. That means the author is trying to say the same thing to everybody, whosoever is reading the passage. If I am reading the passage, if you are reading the passage, if anybody is reading the passage, the author is trying to convey the same points. He is trying to convey the same thing to each and every reader of his, right? So the answer has to be same for everybody. Why? Because it's author's perspective, it's not my perspective. So that's what I said. You will take the author's test. So you will see, would author as an agree with this? Yes, he would agree with this. Yes, this is my answer. No, author would not agree with this. If author would not agree with this, then definitely this is not going to be my answer, because ultimately it's author's point of view. He has written the passage. Are you getting it? Right? All right. So this was about the first thing, that you have to target certain passages and certain questions, right? And out of 5 passages, it's not necessary that you do all the 5 passages. You might do 4 passages with all the questions, right? Or you might read all the 5 passages in the order of preference, as I said, right? But you can do maybe only a few questions from all the passages, because if all the passages have, for example, contextual based questions also, and specific detailed questions also, so as I say, they are easy to figure out, right? So you can do the contextual based questions and the specific information questions and maybe the main idea questions from all the 5 passages, right? And you can do inference based and tone based questions in only those passages where you feel that yes, the options are not very close and I'm very, as in, easily able to differentiate between the options and come up with the correct and the appropriate option as my answer, right students? Okay, now the second thing is, just a moment. All right, so let me erase this for you. Okay, now next thing says use the elimination method, right? Use the elimination method. Before choosing any option, remove extreme emotional and outside knowledge. Now please listen to me very carefully. What am I saying? I said the second thing you have to keep in mind is you have to use POE. So what do we understand by POE? POE stands for process of elimination. So you have to use the elimination method, process of elimination, for choosing the answers, because this is one question that bothers most of the students. All right. Yashita Gandhi has asked a question. She says, ma'am, how to interpret the questions in the correct way always? Beta, see, we have given you the categories of the types of questions, right? So if I say there are main idea questions, contextual vocab questions, inference based, tone based, further application questions, right? So or maybe you can say logical structure type of questions. So I know that which question falls in which category. So as I said, if the passage probably asks me which of the following best reflects the idea that's given in the passage. Now, which of the following best reflects the idea discussed in the passage? Now, this would be an application question, right? So, you have just 4 or 5 or 6 types of questions. So, you know that which falls in which category. So, I don't suppose it's very difficult to understand, right? So, probably when the passage says what is the central theme, or the author is primarily concerned with what thing. So, it's a main idea kind of question. When probably there's a word and there's a word or a phrase or even an idiom, right? And the question directly tells you what could be the replacement of this particular idiom, right? So from the context you can get it. So you can use a different word or a different idiom or a different phrase in that particular context and see whether it's correct or not. So now you know it's a contextual vocab kind of a question. If the question is asking in line 22 of the third paragraph, right, the census that was done in the year blah blah blah, it showed, abhi wo kuch data aapko dega, right? So that data might be given in 4 options with aage piche ek do figure karke, right? So you have to find it out, right, beta Yashita? So that is how you interpret a question correctly, because we know that categories, we know that there are probably 6 or 7 categories only. All right, bache, all right, thank you. Okay. Now when I say before choosing any option, what you need to do, now listen carefully, you need to remove any extreme choice, any emotional or any option that gives you the outside knowledge, that gives you the external information, right? Now I generally tell the students in the classes also, when you read a particular passage, now see what happens. I read a passage related to okay, maybe I read a passage related to Karl Marx, or I read a passage related to Sigmund Freud, right, psychology. I read a passage related to literature, ठीक है, चौसर से related मैंने कुछ पढ़ा, या जॉन कीट्स से related कुछ पढ़ा मैंने. Maybe I'm a literature का student, right? So maybe I know a lot about John Keats. Maybe. Okay. So maybe I know a lot about John Keats, right? So if I come across a paragraph or maybe a poem of John Keats, right, in the form of passage, maybe that's given, right? So if I come across that and I have ample information about that, why? Because I've already studied it in my literature, right? Now, if there's a question and I know the answer of this question is option C, why? Because I know it. I have external information about this. But now try to understand, do the other students who are sitting for the exam, do they have they read Keats? Are they the students of literature? There might be some of them, but you're not very sure that all of them are the students of literature, right? So all those who are the students of literature, even then they might not have read it. Are you getting it? So because that passage is meant to be cracked by every student, may he or she be from any of the domains, right? He or she has to crack it. So if a student has external information but rest of the students do not have the external information, so that external information, that outside knowledge doesn't make any difference, right? Why? Because at that moment of time, that external information is not going to help me crack my answers correctly, though that external information may help me understand and comprehend the passage well. Just understand. That external information, वो outside knowledge मुझे passage को समझने में शायद help कर ले, but it might not be able to help me crack the questions. Is that clear? Is that clear to everybody? So that is why I don't have to use any external information. If it is given in the paragraph, then only it can be my answer. If it is not given in the paragraph, implicitly or explicitly, then it is not my answer, right? So I have to straight away as in rule out the option which is an external information, right? Any extreme choice. Now when I talk about extreme choice, I'll give you the as in some examples afterwards. Also, for example, there are some limiting just a moment. There are some adverbs which we call limiting adverbs. ठीक है, classes में पढ़ा होगा आपने limiting adverbs that limit the meaning of your whole sentence basically. So when you talk about these limiting adverbs, you may be talking about the word like entirely, right? Or you say rarely, or probably you say always, never, seldom, often. So students, many a time I do reiterate these points in the classes also. Right now also I'm reinforcing on this, that whenever you come across these small words, these limiting adverbs like never, always, often, seldom, entirely, completely, absolutely, right? So these are the extreme options. So maybe paragraph is not talking about it, right? Maybe the paragraph says because of the pollution, because of the growing pollution in Delhi NCR, schools may be shut down, right? Now the statement says schools may be shut down. Now what did I interpret? Maybe now the question asks me which of the following is correct as per the passage, and there is one option, maybe the first option, option A says as per the passage the schools will have to shut down or the schools must shut down. तो हम लोग क्या करते हैं, पूरा सेंटेंस को अच्छे से पढ़ते ही नहीं, हम कहते हैं the schools must shut down, the schools will have to shut down. हाँ, ये तो लिखा था, I am very sure that it was there in the paragraph, and when I tell myself that yes, I am very sure that it was, this particular statement was there in the paragraph, I am right also, I am right also. But हाँ, मैंने वो छोटी सी जो चीज है उसको मैंने थोड़ा इग्नोर कर दिया, right? It was written the schools may have to shut down, may have, and the options tell me the schools must, or maybe the schools will have to shut down. Now this must and will जो है उसने मेरा पूरा खेल change कर दिया. Now it's an extreme option. I cannot mark it as my answer. Keep that in mind, students. Please keep that in mind. Anything emotional, as I said, कि आपको लगता है कि हाँ ऐसा होना चाहिए. So emotional का क्या मतलब है? Maybe there is an option which tells you yes, this is the right kind of remedy. This should be done. राइट जो रेपिस्ट्स होते हैं उनको ना एक फिजिकल पनिशमेंट मिलना चाहिए. यस, आई अग्री विद इट. सो आई एम इमोशनल, एज इन मेरा वो इमोशनल जो रूप है वो जाग गया. यस, दिस इज द राइट वन. बट हैज इट बीन टॉक्ड अबाउट इन द पैराग्राफ? इफ नो, देन इट्स नॉट माई आंसर. इट कैन नॉट बी माई आंसर बिकॉज दैट्स माई परसेप्शन. अगेन, are you getting it, bachalo? So remove any extreme emotional and outside knowledge options and compare the remaining options line by line with the passage. When I say line by line with the passage, again I have to look for actually what the author is trying. Is he very soft or mild while saying something, or is he very strong while saying something? Maybe the author in one of the lines says he condemns something. So when he uses this phrase, he condemns, I condemn something, right? So condemn is a very strong word. So now I know that yes, is very strong enough. His as in maybe statement is very strong enough, right? But he might have used certain phrases like very mild phrases. So I need to know about that carefully. Is that clear, students? So be careful with this. Now moving ahead, the next thing you have to take care of is, okay, let me erase this for you. Okay. All right. So as I said, as I already, I was talking to Adiraj Dogra and I told him that would the author agree with this exact wording? This is called the author's test, right? So I have to look for this. If your answer is no, if your answer to this question, which question? Would the author agree with these exact lines? If you say no, then it's not my answer anyway, right? Because ultimately it's author's style, author's perspective, right? And if the answer to this is, would the author agree with these exact wordings? If you say yes, then definitely yes, that is my answer. And if you say no, then definitely yes, that's not my answer. All right, students. Now moving ahead. Third important thing is identify CLAT's 4 repeated question types. Now in CLAT examination over the years, especially past few years, as I said 2020 onwards till 2025, now this time you are taking CLAT 2026 on 7th of December. So you have to identify CLAT's 4 repeated question types. Now which are those 4 repeated question types? The first one is the inference-based question type. Second is the tone or purpose. Third is the contextual vocab, and fourth is the application-based question. Now let's try to understand them one by one. Okay. First one is the inference-based question. Students, just give me 1 minute. I'll have some water. Just give me 1 minute. All right, thank you, students. I couldn't have asked for something better. I got tea also along with water. All right. So let's understand this one by one. Now, when I talk about inference-based questions, again, अभी हमने discuss करा inference-based questions, पर अब थोड़ा सा elaborately इसको inference-based questions को discuss करेंगे. Inference-based questions may ask you what is logically implied, right? So when some question asks you what is the inference or what is logically implied, what this paragraph implies, that means you have to infer the information from the paragraph. You don't have to say what you believe. If I believe in something, that is not my answer. If author believes in something, that is my answer. So how do I do it? Now let's understand. Let's take an example. देखो, अगर मैं बोलती हूँ, for example, I say, okay, मैं बोलती हूँ जो लोग अच्छे से पढ़ते हैं, जिनका मतलब रीडिंग पढ़ना एज एन रीडिंग हैबिट्स की मैं बात कर रही हूँ. अगर कुछ बच्चों की या कुछ स्टूडेंट्स की, जिन स्टूडेंट्स की रीडिंग हैबिट्स अच्छी हैं, उनका परफॉर्मेंस जो है वो अच्छा रहता है एग्जाम्स में. दे स्कोर गुड, दे स्कोर बेटर. सो आई से students with good reading habits score better or they give good performance, right? Then probably I say कि schools में लेकिन ये जो reading habits है इसके लिए कोई time नहीं मिलता है, reading के लिए कोई time नहीं मिलता है. So I say however schools do not allocate probably some specific time to the students for reading. And then I say as a result, or maybe I say therefore students have to as in build these reading habits at their home. ध्यान से सुनिए मैंने क्या कहा. मैंने कहा स्टूडेंट्स जो हैं, मैंने कहा जो रीडिंग है वो बेटर परफॉर्मेंस एज इन इट लीड्स टू बेटर परफॉर्मेंस ऑफ द स्टूडेंट्स इन द एग्जाम्स. They score well because if they have good reading habits. Then I say schools do not give them ample space and time to read. So what do the students have to do? They have to resort to reading habits at their homes. ठीक है, ये हमारा argument है. As I said, nowadays RC, CLAT का RC is based on critical reasoning. So this is an argument of ours. Now maybe the question asks me, what could be logically implied? ठीक है, अब देखो, अब अगर मैं आपको 4 options देती हूँ, let me write those 4 options. Just bear with me for a minute. Let me write them. Okay. Okay, if I say option A. Option A says schools do not care about the students' reading habits. देखो क्वेश्चन आपसे क्या पूछ रहा है. क्वेश्चन इज आस्किंग यू which of the following is logically implied, right? So this is what the question is asking you. Now, first option I have written is schools don't care about the students' reading habits. Now, the second option I might give you is students who don't perform well don't have good reading habits. Good reading habits. Students, please try to understand the options carefully, right? I'll repeat the options at the end. Third option I might give you is that for building good reading habits, or let me put it the other way. Okay, just a moment. Now maybe I say if the students don't get a congenial environment. Okay, let me speak it up. Okay, now maybe the third option says if the children don't get a congenial environment at home to build their reading, they might struggle with the reading, right? They might struggle with their scores. And the last option, maybe it says schools should inculcate this reading habit in the students. अभी ध्यान से देखो, हमारा आर्गुमेंट क्या था कि स्कूल्स में कि रीडिंग जो है वो इट विल लीड टू गुड परफॉर्मेंस, गुड स्कोर्स. स्कूल्स में रीडिंग के लिए टाइम नहीं दिया जाता है, इसलिए अगर बच्चों को रीडिंग पढ़ना है, रीडिंग करना है, अच्छा स्कोर करना है, ठीक है, और रीडिंग हैबिट्स बिल्ड करने हैं, तो उनको घर पे ही वो रीडिंग हैबिट्स बिल्ड करने पड़ेंगे. दिस वाज द आर्गुमेंट. नाउ व्हाट डज द पैराग्राफ इंप्लाई? So if I say schools don't care about the students' reading habits, do you feel this should be my answer? I want an answer from the students. Students, if you can tell me, can this be the answer to the question that what is logically implied from this argument? Schools don't care about the students' reading habits. See, if you say students don't care about the students' reading habits, that is your opinion. That's never mentioned in the argument, right? So I can simply rule it out because this is my opinion. This is not something which is mentioned in the passage anywhere explicitly or implicitly, right? So this is not my answer. B option says students who don't perform well don't have good reading habits. Now see, this is a kind of reverse error. You say students who have good reading habits perform well. That doesn't mean that students who do not perform well do not have good reading habits. So it's logical consistency ka question, right? So it's a reverse error. This cannot be my answer for sure. Then you said, third one, you said if the students don't get a good environment at home, they might struggle with their reading habits and they might not build it. That's true, because at home only they are building the reading habits as per the paragraph, right? So this is something which I can imply from the passage. And the fourth option was that schools should mandatorily start giving some time to the students for reading. They should have a reading zone. Now that's a suggestion I am giving. That's my suggestion. That's again not author's viewpoint, right? So that cannot be my answer. So did you get it, that how we can as in cater to these inference based questions? All right, students. So let me come to the next question. It says tone and purpose. Again, it's a very it's not a very difficult thing, but yes, students feel that it's very difficult when you talk about tone and purpose. Identify the author's intent, right? So again, what the author is trying to critique, what the author is trying to highlight, what the author is trying to explain, I have to cater to that, right? अभी देखो, अभी अगर मैं बोलती हूँ कि जो प्लास्टिक वेस्ट को खत्म करने का एक तरीका है, what is that? That's recycling, right? And then I say, but if we look at it closely, only maybe fractions of this plastic waste gets recycled, and rest of it you can see in the landfills or in the oceans, right? So if you actually want, if the government actually wants to reduce this as in plastic waste, what the government should do, what it should do, it should as in reduce the productivity at the source level. And that is the way to address this crisis of plastic waste. So this is the argument, right? Now, if the question says, what is the purpose of the author behind this argument, right? So what is the purpose? He's basically trying to critique, right? He's basically trying to critique that we assume that the crisis of plastic waste will be as an addressed by recycling, but recycling alone is not the option. Why? Because as in the paragraph it was said that only the fraction of it gets recycled, rest of it you can find somewhere else, right? So recycling alone cannot address this crisis of as in plastic waste. So what is the purpose? The purpose is that he is telling us that whatever assumption we have, the people have, this assumption he is trying to critique. So what could be the tone again? The tone would be a critical tone, as simple as that. ठीक है, तो इतना मुश्किल नहीं है, बस you have to read the statements clearly, you have to understand the phrases and the vocabulary, and that is why it is said that vocabulary is very important. Even if as in directly you don't get any vocabulary, but you get the contextual vocabulary, and to understand the passage also you need to be well versed with the meanings of the words, literal and connotational, definitely yes, right? Then you have contextual vocab, as I said. For example, I give you a statement, okay, I say the scientist was circumspect in his interview, and probably he did not make any bold claims unless his research was as in completely verified, right? So I said the scientist was circumspect, he did not make any bold claims unless his research was completely verified. So what is the meaning of the word circumspect over here? So this is basically the contextual vocab. Even if you do not know the meaning of circumspect over here, can you try to take this word circumspect as a blank over here and try to fill in a word on your own. So you can say the scientist was dash, he did not make any bold claims unless his research was verified. So the scientist was dash. Now you have to figure out कि इस dash में क्या word आएगा, क्या था, scientist क्या थे, वो उन्होंने कोई bold claims नहीं की, इंटरव्यू में बैठ के कोई bold claims नहीं किए जब तक उनका research verify नहीं हुआ. That means what was he? He was careful enough, he was cautious enough, right? So now I got to know about the meaning of circumspect. So circumspect is being cautious and being careful. So this is how you can figure out the meanings of the words from the context. So you can pick up a word on your own, you can keep that as a dash, as a blank for yourself, put a word on your own and then see whether the meaning matches. If yes, then definitely that's your answer, that option is your answer. Is that clear, students? All right, moving ahead, application. एप्लीकेशन बेस्ड क्वेश्चंस अभी हम डिस्कस कर रहे थे. अगर आपसे क्वेश्चन पूछता है कि which of the following best reflects the idea that's given in the passage, that's discussed in the passage, that's an application based question. देखो अगर मैं ये कहती हूँ, okay, I give you an example. For example, I say कि हमारे पास, अच्छा मैं ऐसा कहती हूँ कि रिसर्चर्स ऐसा कहते हैं कि अगर हमें ज्यादा ऑप्शंस दिए जाएं तो it leads to less satisfaction, or probably it reduces our satisfaction, right? So I say researchers have argued that as in more number of or maybe more choices reduces satisfaction. This is what the researchers say. ठीक है, और फिर हम क्या बोलते हैं, अगर हमारे पास overwhelming number of options होंगे, so it probably leads to, you can say, decision fatigue. So you're not able to decide what to do. इतने सारे choices है यार, क्या करें? So it leads to decision fatigue, and finally a person is less happy and he or she as in resorts to the choice whichever as in comes his way. Are you getting it? So that is the kind of argument. अब question पूछ रहा है which of the following, right, which of the following idea best reflects what is discussed in the passage, right? तो अगर मैं एक ऐसा स्टूडेंट से रिलेटेड एक ऐसा ऑप्शन दे देती हूँ, आई से कि मे बी स्टूडेंट्स दे go to different websites and they check out for different careers, and finally they maybe as in fill up the form for one course, and ultimately they realize that the course they have filled up for, they are not satisfied with that, right? It seems to be uncertain for them. right? So the same idea has been reflected in the argument, right? So this is called an application based question. So are you getting it, students? So believe me, it's really not very difficult to crack the RC passages, and I always tell the students that RC is something which all of us should always do. We should try to do all the questions, all the passages, we should try to do it, but mind my words, there is a negative marking of 0.25. So if you do not know the answer, please don't mark it. So out of 25, 26 questions, just do 20 to 20 questions as in cater to accuracy. अब स्पीड का तो वैसे भी कोई फंडा नहीं, एक्यूरेसी होना चाहिए, राइट? यू हैव टू क्रैक द सेक्शन, ऑल्दो देयर आर नो सेक्शनल कट ऑफ्स, बट यस ओवरऑल you have to get good score. That means sectionally you have to be good at everything. Making sense? All right, so let's go to the next slide. Now avoid time traps. Avoid time traps. How do we do that? Don't reread the entire passage, reread only the relevant paragraph. When we are finding the answer to the question, it happens every time we find an answer to the question, we go back to the paragraph. Maybe when we are doing it in the classes, we might not go back to the paragraph. ठीक है, हम टिक कर लेते हैं, क्योंकि we know कोई negative marking नहीं है, गलत भी होगा कोई बात नहीं. But वहाँ पे we are extra cautious, and we have to be, right? We have to be extra cautious. Why? Because वहाँ पे हमें one wrong decision can maybe deduct my 1 mark or 0.25 marks, and one good decision, right, it will fetch me 1 mark. So I have to do everything judiciously over there, right? तो वहां पे मैं ऐसा नहीं कर सकती हूँ कि एक guess work कर लिया. So I'll definitely go back to the paragraph, but I don't have to reread the entire passage. If I'm rereading the entire passage, it's consuming time, and time is the constraint. I don't have that much of time. I have 120 minutes for all the 5 sections, 2 hours for all the 5 sections. So more or less देखा जाए तो आपके जो 22 से 26 क्वेश्चंस होते हैं इंग्लिश सेक्शन में, VA सेक्शन में, you get around 20 to 25 minutes for that. So 20 to 25 minutes for maybe 5 passages. So if I say that you do all of them, right, so maybe 5 minutes per passage, right? Or even if you do four of them, maybe 6 minutes per passage, more or less. Are you getting it? So you have to, as in, use your time judiciously over there. So when you go back to find out the answer for a question, please don't reread the whole paragraph, whole passage. Read that particular paragraph or read those lines. You have to cater to the context also, that's for sure, right? Skip long abstract questions on the first pass. जो भी abstract questions है, long questions जो आपको समझ नहीं आ रही. For example, question says, which of the following the author is not most likely to disagree? Which of the following options, with which of the following options the author is not most likely to disagree? अब इस क्वेश्चन को समझने में ही टाइम लगेगा. नॉट भी है, डिसअग्री भी है. ध्यान से देखना है कि क्वेश्चन पूछ क्या रहा है. सो इफ यू आर नॉट एबल टू फिगर इट आउट, उसको छोड़ दो फिलहाल के लिए. फिलहाल वो क्वेश्चंस करो जो बिल्कुल स्पॉट ऑन है कि हाँ ये तो आंसर ठीक होना ही होना है. Are you getting it? But again I am saying that doesn't mean that you will leave these questions, but yes, ये later half के लिए रखेंगे हम. ठीक है. All right, now moving ahead, what else can we do to score good? Spot the CLAT style wrong options. So we have already discussed it, but yes, let's give some more time to these options. Okay, spot the CLAT style wrong options. कैसे? Extreme language, we already talked about it, कि अगर कहीं पे always है, never है, entirely है, rarely है, उन options को, because see, let's understand whenever author talks about something, whenever a passage is written by somebody, the author, right? So what he or she tries to do, they will never give you anything absolute. Maybe there is a particular passage जहाँ पे वो हर कोई चीज absolute तरीके से बोल रहा है, that's an exception, right? But most of the times you will see that there's nothing absolute in the paragraphs, right? So that is why when we talk about these limiting adverbs, they will always make my option, not always, but yes, most of the times they'll make my option wrong. Because when I say always, when I say never, I'm talking about the absolute things, and paragraphs generally don't talk about absolute things. The author gives his viewpoints, and his viewpoints would also be like here and there, unless, as I said, there's a topic wherein he or she as in completely agrees or disagrees with a particular point. Is that clear, students? So extreme language has to be avoided. Options adding new facts. Now see, now I have 4 options, right? And usually what does happen? We get stuck at 2 options. ठीक है, 2 को हम overrule करते हैं, 2 options में we get stuck. Now how do I find out which one is the correct? Now, one of the ways is that if there is an option which is adding new fact, as I said, everything will come from the passage. Everything, every answer to every question will come from the passage I have read. It will not come from outside, right? So, if there is any option that is adding some new information, for example, I'm talking about the kind of homework that's been given in the schools nowadays, right? And maybe one of the options says that the schools should adopt the FinLAT's homework policy. ठीक है, क्वेश्चन पूछता है which of the following is correct as per the passage, right? And one of the options say the school should adopt FinLAT's homework policy, right? Maybe कहीं कहीं passage में बोला गया है कि उनको कोई homework policy adopt करना चाहिए, right? But the option says the school should adopt Finland's homework policy. अभी आपको देखना है फिनलैंड का कहीं नाम आया है पैसेज में? अरे फिनलैंड का तो कहीं नाम ही नहीं आया है, right? So this is something which is adding a new fact to that option, right? So if it is adding a new fact to that option, that's not my answer, as simple as that. ठीक है students, so are you getting it? All right. Next is moral judgments not present in the text. Now, as I already give you an example and I said that most of the times what happens, हमें ऐसा लगता है हाँ हम इमोशनल हो जाते हैं, हाँ यार ऐसा होना चाहिए, right? So that's my opinion, or maybe that's my suggestion. That cannot be my answer. So here again, moral judgments should not be present in the text. So if there's an option, if there's an option which has a moral judgment, right? Again, paragraph will not give me a judgment. It will not compare anything, right? So अगर कोई option है जिसमें एक moral judgment दिख रहा है मुझे, वो मेरा answer नहीं है. Why? Because that moral judgment is mine, maybe. That's my opinion, as I said. Are you getting it, students? Right? अभी देखो, for example, अगर मैं बोलती हूँ, okay, let's take an example. All right, I say, okay, I say कि, for example, I say the policy makers, okay, for example, I say the author blames the policy makers. Right? So when I say the author blames the policy makers for something, so this is a moral judgment. क्यों? क्योंकि ये मुझे लग रहा है, ऐसा कहीं पैसेज में बताया नहीं गया है. So this is a kind of moral judgment I am giving. So that cannot be my answer. That's for sure. ठीक है students? So you have to be very careful with this. Now the next thing says half true options, true at the beginning and false at the end. Now the paragraph talks about the climatic changes, or maybe the paragraph talks about the impact of climate on agriculture, right? तो paragraph में ये बताया गया, और one of the options maybe says, the climate has a huge impact on agriculture, right? Since the climate has a huge impact on agriculture, so the global farming in the longer run would not be possible, right? Since the climate has a huge impact on agriculture, the global farming in the longer run will not be possible. It will altogether disappear, right? तो पहला part जो है, since the climate has a huge impact on the agriculture, maybe this is something which has been discussed in the passage. शायद हम उसी बारे में बात कर रहे हैं कि climatic conditions कैसे agriculture को impact कर रही हैं, right? But later on I said that global farming disappear हो जाएगा. Now this information is not given in the paragraph, so this is called a half true option. So the first half is true, but the second half is not true. So there's a partial information which is given in the option. So any option that gives me a partial information and the rest of the information it is giving me is wrong, it cannot be my answer at all. Because for my option to be correct, it has to be entirely in sync with what has been discussed in the passage. Are you getting it, students? Yes or no? All right, good. So this is about it. And then you say overgeneralization of one line. Now, कई बार हम किसी लाइन को ना ओवर जनरलाइज कर देते हैं, है ना, कि मतलब कोई स्पेसिफिक हमने चीज बोली. फॉर एग्जाम्पल आई से then there was a particular company which was found as in which did a big scam, or the manager was found as in responsible for the embezzlement of funds, right? So I gave you a statement that in one particular company there was a manager or a CEO who was responsible for the embezzlement of the funds. ठीक है, तो ये पैराग्राफ में हमें बताया गया. Now maybe one of the options says since the manager was responsible for the scam, right? So this means that all the corporations are corrupt. So when you say this means that all the corporations are corrupt, it cannot be my answer. Why? Because I am overgeneralizing the statement. Now this is a specific case of a particular corporation, right? Of a particular company. I cannot generalize it to the rest of the companies also. So that doesn't mean that all the companies are, we are not using inductive logic over here, right? So हम specific से general की तरफ नहीं जा सकते. So if there is any generalization of a particular statement or a line from the paragraph, then that's not my answer. So students, this is something which is going to help you really well if you understood this one. That extreme language वाला जो भी options है वो मेरा आंसर नहीं है. One thing. Second thing, options जो नए facts add कर रहे हैं. If you're talking about something but there is some extra information or maybe a new fact is added in the option which was never discussed in the paragraph, that can never be my answer, right? Now moral judgments, if you say that you blame or you condemn or you feel that maybe you feel that scientists are responsible for the society's ignorance, right? So that's a moral judgment you are giving. So if there is any option like this, that cannot be my answer. As I said that there are no comparisons, there is no absolute thing or there are no moral judgments which are generally given in the passages. So that cannot be my answer. Then half true options. When I say half true options, I am talking about the options which you might find right at the beginning of the statement. Right, so that is why it is said that read the options carefully, read the question carefully. जब आप questions पढ़ते हैं पहले question को अच्छे से read करो and understand what the question is asking, and also understand the options one by one, what the option is asking. At times what happens, maybe I start reading a particular option and I feel हाँ ये तो ठीक है, पर आप आगे वाला भी तो पढ़ो, आगे क्या बोला गया है. Maybe it's a half true option, and in half true options generally the first part is correct and the later part is not correct. Are you getting it? तो इसलिए आपको ध्यान रखना है कि अगर आपने आधा ऑप्शन पढ़ा and you feel yes this is right and probably you mark it without looking further, so again you might lose out on 0.25 marks. ठीक है, तो आपको ध्यान देना है कि हाफ ऑप्शंस में फर्स्ट पार्ट ट्रू होता है, सेकंड पार्ट शायद ट्रू नहीं होता है. क्लियर है? Alright, then overgeneralization. As I said, if there's a specific case and you generalize it and you make it a general, as in as in focus on a broader canvas और आप उसको generalize करते हो, ठीक है, तो वो शायद सही आंसर नहीं होगा. Is that clear, students? Alright, now moving ahead, the strategy we are looking for here now is, just a moment, students. Maintain attempt strategy. Now when I say maintain attempt strategy, now aim at doing 18 to 23 questions attempted with 80% accuracy. Over attempting leads to accuracy drop. Just believe me. Over attempting leads to accuracy drop. तो accuracy में कहाँ fight हो जाता है? जब आप over attempt करते हो. आप over attempt क्यों करते हो? Because you get tempted. तो tempt नहीं होना है. You don't have to get tempted, right? You know that you are sitting here for an exam. You are taking an exam, right? This is not your practice test which is happening in the class, right? It's more or less like a mock I'm taking. So I have to be serious enough. So I have to, as in focus on the accuracy more. So मुझे वही questions करने हैं जिसका मुझे पता है कि ये आंसर होगा. जहां पे मुझे लग रहा है 90% मुझे आंसर नहीं पता है, तो students please leave that question, because entrance examinations do give you the margin of leaving the questions. So out of 25 questions or out of 24 questions, you are not supposed to do all the 24 questions or 25 questions. You can do 22 questions with good accuracy. Okay? Now, controlled attempts. This is something what I have written. Controlled attempts is equal to controlled negatives, which is equal to controlled anxiety. तो attempts को control करोगे, negatives control होंगे, तो anxiety control होएगा, right? So these things might seem कि अरे क्या है, but again, if you feel them closely, what I am trying to say, you will say yes, maybe ma'am is right. Alright students, so let's go to the next wala thing. Now let's start doing the passages. ठीक है, अभी फटाफट से कुछ पैसेजेस करते हैं एंड जो भी हमने अभी तक सीखा उसको हम इस यहाँ पे अप्लाई करने की कोशिश करते हैं. एंड बिलीव मी, द क्वेश्चंस आर नॉट रियली वेरी टफ. maybe there is one question in a passage which is very tough. You have the margin to leave that anyway, right? तो चलिए बच्चा लोग जल्दी से हम पैसेज पढ़ते हैं. अब let me read it for you. Okay, now this is the passage 1 which is on environment and economics. ठीक है, it says for decades global climate negotiations have hinged on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, acknowledging that industrialized nations historically contributed more to greenhouse gas emissions. ठीक है, ये लाइन को याद रखना है. क्या global climate negotiations have hinged on the principle of CBDR, which means common but differentiated responsibilities, acknowledging that industrialized nations historically contributed more to the greenhouse emissions than the developing ones. तो industrialized nations ने क्या करा? They contributed more to the green gas emissions rather than the developing ones. Yet this principle has grown increasingly contentious in countries in an era where emerging economies now account for a substantial share of annual emissions. Wealthier countries argue that a framework unfairly burdens them with disproportionate expectations. Let's read this line carefully. Wealthier countries argue that the framework unfairly burdens them with the disproportionate expectations, especially as rapidly industrializing nations continue to expand coal capacity and pursue energy-intensive growth. From their perspective, climate action must reflect present-day emissions rather than historical patterns alone. डेवलपिंग नेशंस काउंटर दैट इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ. अब डेवलपिंग नेशंस क्या कहते हैं? ये तो हिस्टोरिकल जो इंडस्ट्रियलाइज्ड नेशंस थे वो क्या कह रहे थे, राइट? अब हमारे डेवलपिंग नेशंस क्या कह रहे हैं? डेवलपिंग नेशंस काउंटर दैट इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ रिमेन्स इंपेरेटिव फॉर पॉवर्टी एलिवेशन. नाउ दे से इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ रिमेन्स इंपेरेटिव फॉर पॉवर्टी एलिवेशन. पॉवर्टी एलिवेशन मींस पॉवर्टी को कम करना, ठीक है, एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेशन एंड द बेसिक वेलफेयर. Even though renewable technologies have become more affordable, their deployment still demands significant upfront investment, grid modernization and technological expertise that many countries struggle to secure. ठीक है, वो कह रहे हैं कि renewable technologies जो हैं वो affordable तो हो चुकी हैं लेकिन इन्वेस्टमेंट्स नहीं है उतना, ठीक है, और क्या कहते हैं टेक्नोलॉजिकल एक्सपर्टाइज नहीं है लोगों को, वो सब जो टेक्नोलॉजिकल चीजें हैं उनको सेटअप करने की. These nations also highlight an unresolved historical debt. Countries that prospered for over a century through fossil fuel driven industrialization now urge restraint from those still striving to ensure reliable electricity, clean water and essential infrastructure. For them, stringent emission caps risk locking millions into cycles of deprivation. So these are the two schools of thought. ठीक है, एक industrialized nation है वो क्या कह रहा है, और एक आपका the second one you have is your developing nations, right? So they counter the arguments of the industrialized nations. Now moving ahead, this impasse often obscures. Now what is impasse? I-M-P-A-S-S-E, impasse. It's a French word. Impasse is nothing, it's simply a deadlock, right? So this impasse that obscures means something that's not clear, right? A deeper structural problem. What is that? Climate negotiations tend to frame responsibility as a zero-sum game. Now we need to understand that what is the zero-sum game, where gains for one side are seen as losses for the other. So maybe there's a question which talks about the zero-sum game. Now I know what is zero-sum game. It means one's gain is one's loss. Such an adversarial building equitable financing, such an adversarial approach leaves little room for constructive cooperation on issues like technology transfer, capacity building, equitable financing and climate resilient infrastructure. अभी देखो, अभी यहाँ पे मैं आपको बताती हूँ. For example, now one of the questions says which of the following is correct as per the passage. Now the statement says adversarial approach leaves no room for constructive cooperation on issues like technology transfer, capacity building and climate resilient infrastructure. Now I feel that yes, this is the exact line which has been taken from the paragraph and blindly I can mark this option as the correct option. Why? Because these are the exact wordings of the passage. But what did I say? I said the adversarial approach leaves no room for constructive cooperation, whereas my paragraph says that they leave little room for constructive cooperation. समझ आई आपको बेटा? तो ये चीज का ध्यान रखना है. अभी नो रूम और लिटिल रूम, सिर्फ नो और लिटिल का डिफरेंस है. मेरा ऑप्शन क्या कहते हैं, जो मैंने करेक्ट करा वो गलत था, क्योंकि यहाँ पे लिटिल रूम बोल रहा है और ऑप्शन में वो नो रूम बोल रहा था. ठीक है, so be very careful with these kind of things. All right, moving ahead, as a result, discussions that should be centered on global environmental security frequently devolve into debates over fairness, blame, and burden sharing. Now, experts argue that unless nations move beyond rigid classifications and adopt flexible, context-sensitive commitments, global targets may remain aspirational rather than achievable. ठीक है, तो जब तक हम rigid classifications के बियॉन्ड नहीं जाएंगे, जब तक हम एक फ्लेक्सिबल स्ट्रक्चर और एक क्या कहते हैं कॉन्टेक्स्ट सेंसिटिव कमिटमेंट नहीं उसकी तरफ ध्यान नहीं देंगे, सो वॉट एवर वी आर थिंकिंग ऑफ दे विल जस्ट रिमेन द एस्पिरेशनल गोल्स. वी कैन नॉट अचीव दीज गोल्स, राइट? This shift would require recognizing that countries lie along a developmental spectrum rather than within fixed categories of developed and developing nations. It would also mean designing mechanisms that reward innovation, encourage renewable transitions at all income levels, and create transparent pathways for climate finance that actually reach vulnerable communities. Ultimately, redefining responsibility not as a constraint but as an opportunity for collective advancement may be the only way. Now, listen. It may be the only way. अब यहाँ पे ये absolute term use किया गया है. So if this is the question and if this is the option, then yes, it's the correct option. Why? Because it's written over there that the advancement may be the only way to break the deadlock and forge an effective global climate strategy. Right? So if I in nutshell give you the summary of this whole paragraph, what did it talk about? It said that global climate negotiations remain gridlocked as developed nations emphasize present emissions, while developing nations stress developmental needs and historical responsibility, making flexible, cooperative commitments essential. Right? So this was the summary of the paragraph. Now let's go to the questions quickly. Chaliye ji. Now, my first question is a main idea type of a question. What is the primary? Okay, it's not a main idea type of a question. It's a probably a specific detail kind of a question. What is the primary reason wealthier countries criticize the common but differentiated what? Responsibility. Okay, framework. Option A says it gives developing nations greater control over climate funding. Not really. Option B says it restricts their domestic energy policy. No, we have not talked about domestic energy policy over here. Option C says it prevents technological advancement in renewable energy. And option D says it places disproportionate responsibility on them despite rising emissions from the emerging economy. So if you remember that there was this statement which we, okay, let me go to that. See, it talked about here, it just talked about that wealthier countries argue that the framework unfairly burdens them with disproportionate exceptions, especially as rapidly industrializing nations continue to expand coal capacity and pursue energy intensive growth, right? So that is my answer to question number 1, which says that wealthier nations argue that they are unfairly burdened even though emerging economies now have major annual emissions. So the answer to question number 1 is D. It places disproportionate responsibility on them despite rising emissions from emerging economies. ठीक है, चलिए जी, नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन क्या कह रहा है? डेवलपिंग नेशंस जस्टिफाई देयर पोजीशन इन क्लाइमेट नेगोशिएशंस मेनली बाय एम्फसाइजिंग व्हाट? सो तो पहला वाला क्वेश्चन था कि वेल्थियर कंट्रीज क्या कर रहे हैं, वो क्यों क्रिटिसाइज कर रहे हैं सीबीडीआर को? वो इसलिए क्रिटिसाइज कर रहे हैं क्योंकि वो कह रहे हैं कि ये डिस्प्रोपोर्शनेट रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी हम पे डाल रहा है. ठीक है, और डेवलपिंग नेशंस क्यों जस्टिफाई कर रहे हैं देयर पोजीशन इन क्लाइमेट नेगोशिएशंस एंड हाउ आर दे एज इन जस्टिफाइंग देयर पोजीशन? Options say their superiority of fossil fuels. Okay, they mainly emphasize on the superiority of fossil fuels or renewables. No, not really. Their need for continued economic growth and limited access to capital. Their unwillingness to adopt modern technology and the aim to compete with industrialization nations in emissions. Now, the answer is option B. Their need for continued economic growth and limited access to capital. How do you find that? if you remember that the passage, it notes that developing nations need growth for poverty elevation. There was a line, right? So they need growth for poverty elevation and lack of upfront capital for renewables. So they said that there is no as an upfront investment that's happening, right? There is we need the poverty to get elevated, but we don't have the funds, we don't have the investment, we don't have that modern technology that will help us do that, right? So question number 2, definitely yes, option B is the correct answer. Moving ahead, the phrase zero sum game in the passage most nearly implies that climate negotiations are viewed as, now you know what is zero sum game, one's loss is one's gain. Okay, now debates where both sides willingly compromise, no, not at all, they don't. Situations where one side's gain is seen as another's loss, yes, that is something which is explicitly mentioned in the passage, so definitely B has to be my answer. But let me go to option C and D also. C says efforts that always lead to mutual benefit, not really, because they are not getting mutually benefited, that is why there is a kind of rift or conflict. Scientific calculations with no political influence. Now, this is something of the scope of the paragraph, scientific calculations with no political influence. We have never talked about political influence in the whole passage. So B should be the correct answer. Yes, correct answer is option B. A zero sum game assumes one party's advantage equals another's disadvantage. That's what the paragraph talks about. Okay, moving ahead. Question number 4 says, the author suggests that rigid classifications like developed and developing should be replaced because, okay, now the options say, because countries no longer accept international rules, not really. Because such categories oversimplify the developmental spectrum and hinder nuanced commitments. Yes, as of now, this should be my answer. Developing nations are now richer than developed ones. It has never been mentioned in the passage, right? Climate finance is no longer necessary. It's always necessary, right? So we cannot say that it's no longer necessary. Neither has the passage talked about it. So option B, as I said, is the correct answer, because the passage argues for flexible, context-sensitive commitments reflecting diverse developmental stages. So this makes my option B correct. Question number 5. Which of the following best captures the overall message of the passage? Right, so let's look at the options and let's try to find out the answers. Climate negotiations fail because renewable technology is ineffective. No, we don't say that it's ineffective, not at all. The climate crisis can be solved only when countries prioritize national interests. Again, nothing of national interests has been talked about in the paragraph. C option says overcoming global climate deadlocks requires collaborative, flexible frameworks instead of adversarial ones. Yes, that could be my answer. Why? Because this is the message given by the passage, that even if we talk about the historical nations or the developed nations, unless they as in collaborate, right, unless the motive remains the same, unless they have any adversaries, right, in between, so they cannot work for the betterment, right? So C seems to be the correct option as of now. Let's look at option D. Historical emissions should be ignored in future agreements. Why should it be ignored? And anyway, it has not talked about, it has not been talked about in the paragraph. So C is the correct answer. Yes, the passage concludes that only collaborative adaptable approaches can achieve global climate targets. All right, students. So again, see, this was an easy passage to do, I would say. So we should have done this passage anyway. Moving ahead, now there's passage 2, which is based on sociology and media. So this might be one of the passages that might again capture your interest. So let's read this. Okay, let's take a break for 1 minute. Till the time you can just read this on your own. Okay. The rise of short-form content videos lasting under 1 minute has fundamentally reshaped patterns of attention in digital age. Platforms increasingly optimize for what designers call scroll velocity, meaning the speed at which a user moves through content, scroll velocity. So nowadays you must have learned that the attention span of a particular person is just 8 seconds. So do you understand it? जो Instagram reels है, social media, बस 8 सेकंड में हम बोर हो जाते हैं कंटेंट से, right? But I'm very thankful to you that you are here and probably are with me for past 1.5 hours. Anyway, So this is about the scroll velocity. All right. Next, their algorithms are programmed to reward stimuli capable of generating instant engagement, a surprising visual, a provocative statement, or a quick joke. Right. So if there are certain surprising visuals, certain jokes, maybe your attention gets captured. Otherwise, probably you feel bored and you move on to the next reel. As a result, content that triggers immediate emotional reactions, amusement, outrage, envy, tends to be amplified and circulated widely. So this is something which we have to keep in mind, that any content that triggers immediate emotional reactions, right, they tend to be amplified and circulated widely. While this has democratized visibility by allowing anyone with a smartphone to reach millions, it has also fragmented public discourse. So now there's a disadvantage also, there is an advantage also. So when we use these as in reels, we within seconds we can spread these reels to a number of our friends and relatives, right, and to the entire, you can say, population, right. But on the other hand, the public discourse जो हम आपस में conversation करते हैं वो खत्म हो गया, that has become fragmented. Users now consume information in a tiny, decontextualized bursts that seldom offer nuance or continuity. ठीक है, हमें छोटे छोटे chunks में information अब पसंद है. We cannot sit for long hours and probably discuss the things with our parents or maybe our grandparents or even with our friends, right? So we need the information in chunks, decontextualized bursts. Psychologists warn the constant exposure to rapidly shifting stimuli may erode the willingness or ability to engage with complex material. Now, this is something which is a sort of information also for all of us, because see, I every time tell the students that when you read a particular paragraph, it's not only that you have to read it for answering the questions, especially when you are practicing them. It's a sort of information. It's a way to get the information from that piece of text, right? And you have to keep that information with you, right? It will help you in the longer run also. So now see, what do the psychologists want? They say that constant exposure to rapidly shifting stimuli may erode the willingness or ability to engage with complex material. So when we keep on shifting our, you can say, attention, right? So it might erode or it might hamper my ability to deal with the complex and the complicated material, right? This is what psychologists say. This is not what I am saying, right? Early studies suggest a measurable decline in sustained attention among the participants habituated to high frequency content flows, particularly those who spend several hours daily on short form platforms. The human brain, which adapts quickly to reward patterns, begins to prefer immediate gratification over slower, more effortful cognitive tasks such as reading long articles or analyzing arguments. Okay, moving ahead. Yet blaming the audience alone oversimplifies the issue. Attention is shaped not merely by individual choice, but by platform design also. So what does this line say? That you cannot blame everything onto the individual, that individuals are doing this, individuals are probably they have the short span and they are probably shifting the spans. You cannot blame the individuals altogether. Why? Because attention is shaped not merely by individual choice, but it's also shaped by the design of the platform. जो हमारा सोशल मीडिया का प्लेटफॉर्म है उसका क्या डिजाइन है, ठीक है, what algorithms have been set, so they also have a role to play. Social media companies possess strong economic incentives to maintain addictive features, autoplay, infinite scroll, reward notifications, right? तो ये जो सोशल मीडिया कंपनीज है इनका एक फीचर है कि उनको कुछ कुछ ऐसे फीचर्स डालने हैं जो एडिक्ट कर दें लोगों को हमारी तरफ, ठीक है, उनके एड्स की तरफ, उनकी रील्स की तरफ, बिकॉज दिस इज फॉर व्हाट दे गेट द इंसेंटिव्स. Because these patterns maximize the time users spend on their platform, thereby increasing advertising revenue, right? So आप देख रहे हो ये सब कैसा चल रहा है, right? So this is a piece of information for all of you, in fact for all of us. The architecture of digital environments is thus deliberately engineered to favor quantity of engagement over the quality of thought. So they believe in quantity, they don't believe in quality, right? So do you know that what kind of, they are basically impeding these social media platforms in a way, they are hampering our growth, yes, our mental growth in a way. Okay, what remains unclear is whether users will eventually develop adaptive behaviors such as curating their feeds more selectively, imposing digital time limits, or deliberately gravitating towards long form material for deeper understanding. So what will they do? Let's see. Some evidence points to a slow rise in digital hygiene practices, especially among young adults who are increasingly aware of how algorithm systems manipulate attention, right? देखो आप एक टाइप का रील देखना शुरू हो जाओगे ना तो आपको उसी टाइप के रील्स आना शुरू हो जाएंगे because algorithm is set in such a manner, right? Okay. However, it's equally plausible that these shifts reflect a more profound cultural transformation, an emerging norm where brevity becomes the default mode of communication and depth is viewed as optional rather than necessary. So earlier we probably used to have long conversations and we would go deeper and deeper into it. We will delve deeper into a particular conversation. Why? Because we wanted to understand that yes, what's happening. But as it is said that these shifts reflect a profound cultural transformation. Because nowadays, as we say, brevity is the soul of the wit, right? So nowadays people are becoming more witty maybe, and they feel that brevity is something which is important, right? So they say that longer text and longer messages, they don't have any value, they're not necessary. Rather, if there is anything which is crisp, which is brief, that plays its role well. The long-term consequences for democratic deliberation are particularly concerning, right? Public reasoning depends on context, patience, and the willingness to engage with competing viewpoints. If civic engagement becomes shaped by fleeting clips rather than informed analysis, democratic decision making may weaken, creating an environment where emotional persuasion outweighs rational debate. The challenge, therefore, is not simply technological but societal. How to preserve meaningful attention in an era designed to erode it. Now see, if you look at this last line, it's beautifully as in written. It says the challenge therefore is not simply technological, it's a societal challenge, right? How to preserve meaningful attention in an era designed to erode it. So this era is designed to erode the meaningful attention, right? To preserve, to erode the meaningful conversations, right? Meaningful texts. So how do we preserve those meaningful texts in such an era, which is as in meant to maybe erode these texts, meaningful texts, right? Now, what is the summary? The summary says short form, algorithm driven content is reshaping attention, weakening deep thinking and democratic discourse by prioritizing instant engagement over sustained and meaningful analysis. That is what basically the paragraph is talking about. So if I look at this paragraph, when you started reading this paragraph, it seemed a little, you can say, easy to understand, right? But when we moved ahead with the paragraphs in the passage, it seemed a little difficult. Why? Because there was a lot of, you can say, analogies were drawn, lot of comparison was there. So ultimately the brain stopped working, right? So in such kind of passages, I would say that yes, you don't have to read the passage to completely understand it. As far as you are able to mark the questions, mark the answers of the questions correctly, that's perfectly all right if you did not understand maybe the 60% of the passage, because you are not required to in an examination. Let me be very clear on this, students, right? Especially in the passages like this. All right, so let's go to the questions quickly. What does the passage identify as a major consequence of algorithms for scroll velocity? Let's look at the options. Option 1 says higher production costs for content creators. Second says amplification of content that triggers immediate emotional responses. Yes, this was something which was explicitly mentioned in the passage. A option talks about the content creators. Again, this is off the track. C option says greater accuracy in news reporting. Where did we talk about news reporting in the paragraph? No, this is not my answer. D option says reduced dependence on advertising revenue. Not really. So definitely as B is the correct answer. The passage states that algorithms reward stimuli capable of instant engagement and amplifying emotional content, right? So B is the correct answer to this question. Moving ahead, question number 2 says, according to the passage, psychologists are concerned that short form content may do what? It may increase the popularity of long documentaries. How come? Not at all. It may improve attention spans among younger audiences. It may reduce willingness to engage with complex material, and it may make people more resistant to emotional manipulation. So, if you remember that it was written in the paragraph that if we shift to these short reels, our brain might be trained in such a manner that probably we might find it difficult to tackle the complex material. So it may reduce our willingness to engage with complex material. Option C is the correct answer to this question. And as studies have showed that reduced sustained attention and diminished engagement with complex tasks. Moving ahead, question number 3 says the passage suggests that addictive platform design is primarily driven by addictive platform design, right? What these companies are doing. So they are putting some addictive features so that you are totally hooked with these reels, even if they are very for a shorter period of time, right? So the passage suggests that addictive platform design is primarily driven by government mandates, not at all. User demand for educational content, no, we have not talked about any educational content. Economic incentives tied to advertising revenue, yes, because if you add these addictive features, so they will spend more time, and when they spend more time, it's a revenue generation for your company. So C is the correct option. And D option says ethical commitments to user well-being, no, we have not talked about any ethical commitments in the paragraph. So C is the correct option, which says platforms maintain features that maximize user time because they boost advertising revenue. All right, question number 4. Question number 4 says, what does the author present as an open question about user behavior? Right? So let's look at the option. Whether users will stop using the internet entirely, whether users will adapt by curating feeds or shifting towards long form content, whether governments will ban short form of videos, or whether algorithms will stop recommending entertainment. So if you look at all these options, B option was explicitly mentioned over there, whether users will adapt by curating feeds or shifting towards long form content, right? The passage highlights uncertainty regarding whether users will adopt adaptive behaviors like digital hygiene. So we talked about digital hygiene in the paragraph, right? So that is my answer. So question number 5 says the author is most concerned about the impact of these trends on what? The profitability of content creators, the spread of celebrity culture, we have not talked about the celebrity culture, democratic deliberation and quality of public reasoning, and the popularity of long form of journalism. So again, we have not talked about the journalism. So the answer is democratic deliberation and quality of public reasoning. If you remember, the passage concludes by warning that democratic decision making may be weakened by the shallow and rapid content consumption, right? So the answer is that democratic deliberation and quality of public reasoning. All right, moving ahead, we have one more passage, right? So let's read this passage quickly. It is on philosophy and ethics. A curious paradox lies at the heart of moral philosophy. What is that paradox? So you know what is a paradox, right? ठीक है, paradox पता है ना क्या होता है? Okay, so what is the paradox? Let's understand it. Although humans often defend their ethical choices as rational, many such choices arise from intuition rather than deliberate thought, right? So humans क्या करते हैं? वो क्या कहते हैं? They defend their ethical choices as rational. But वो ethical choices जो वो rational reason पे based कुछ नहीं होता है, वो क्या होता है? That is based on the intuition. So that is a paradox. Right? So what is the paradox? The paradox is that we defend our ethical choices as rational. We defend our ethical choices by saying that we have a logic and a reason behind that, but that's not true. Actually, they are based on our intuition, the way we have been conditioned from the very beginning, from the very outset, right? So that is a paradox. Okay, moving ahead. Experiments in moral psychology consistently show that individuals tend to reach moral conclusions first and construct justifications only afterward. Again, it's a piece of information. Please be careful while reading. For instance, participants asked whether it's wrong to perform harmless yet socially taboo actions such as cleaning a toilet with a national flag or eating a pet that died of natural causes. Often insist on their wrongness even when unable to articulate a coherent or principled reason. So when you are asked with such questions, right, so you will definitely say that they are wrong, even if you don't have a proper reasoning and logic behind them, right? This phenomenon, known as moral dumbfounding, suggests that intuitive reactions can be powerful drivers of moral judgment. So how does our moral judgment come? It comes from intuition. That is basically what this paragraph talks about. And what is this phenomenon called? It's called moral dumbfounding. Okay, moving ahead. However, this does not mean moral reasoning is irrelevant or obsolete. Rather, it suggests that reasoning frequently functions more like a lawyer than a judge. Now, see, such a beautiful line. It suggests that reasoning frequently functions more like a lawyer than a judge, defending positions already formed instead of impartially evaluating them. So now, because you are taking CLAT, so very beautifully they have given the difference between a lawyer and a judge. So what does a lawyer do? A lawyer defends the positions already formed. And what does a judge do? He or she impartially evaluates them. Right? So what a beautiful distinction. Okay, moral reasoning in this view becomes a tool for persuasion, social justification, or maintaining group cohesion. Some philosophers argue that this post hoc reasoning undermines claims of moral objectivity, since judgments rooted primarily in intuition appear to be culturally and emotionally contingent. If people justify their decisions only after forming them, how stable or universal can those decisions truly be? Right? So if you have already formed those judgments, you cannot call them you cannot call them rational, right? So that means they are intuitive, because you've already formed them based on your intuition, right? Moving ahead, others challenge this pessimistic interpretation by noting that intuitive foundations are not inherently problematic. Intuition may encode evolved responses that help societies maintain cooperation, fairness, and social harmony. From this perspective, intuitive judgments might be efficient cognitive shortcuts rather than irrational impulses. Moreover, reasoning itself has limitations. It can be biased, inconsistently applied, and shaped by self-interest, right? So, reasoning also has its limitations. Perhaps a combination of intuition and reasoning, rather than the primacy of one over the other, captures how moral cognition actually operates, right? So, it has to be a combination of both intuition and reasoning. Yet the debate ultimately points to a deeper and more consequential question: should moral legitimacy rest on how we arrive at judgments or on the consequences of those judgments, right? If the moral worth of an action depends primarily on its real world outcomes, such as reducing harm, promoting fairness, or enhancing well-being, then the intuitive or rational origins of the decision may matter less than what it accomplishes. Conversely, if moral legitimacy requires that judgment be formed through rational, impartial procedures, then intuition's prominent role becomes troubling, right? So, in this ongoing debate of intuition and rationalism, moral psychology and philosophy converge on a single insight. And what is that? Understanding why we may judge. Why we judge may be as important as understanding what we judge. Right? So why we judge is important, but what we judge is also important. The challenge lies in reconciling intuitive impulses with reflective reasoning to create moral framework that is both humanly realistic and ethically robust. Right? So there has to be a combination of these two. Now, what is the summary of the paragraph? It says moral judgment is largely driven by intuition. That's what the paragraph says, rather than by reasoning. Right? And raising the question of whether moral legitimacy should depend on how decisions are formed or on the outcome they produce. Right? So this is what the paragraph is talking about. Now let's go to the questions quickly. Question number 1 says, what does the passage suggest about the relationship between the intuition and moral reasoning? कि क्या intuition और moral reasoning में relationship है? A option says intuition and reasoning always conflict in moral decision making. B option says moral reasoning typically justifies decisions that intuition has already produced. C says reasoning is the primary driver of moral judgment in most situations. And D says intuition plays no meaningful role in ethical choices. So C says reasoning is the primary driver of moral judgment. No, not at all. We say that intuition se aata hai moral judgment. So C is not my answer. Intuition plays no meaningful role in ethical choices. D is also not my answer. Intuition and reasoning always conflict, always, right? It's an extreme choice. No, it's not my answer. So B is the correct answer to my question. Yes, definitely yes. Which says moral reasoning typically justifies decisions that intuition has already produced. Moving to the next question. Why do some philosophers believe post hoc reasoning weakens claims of moral objectivity? ठीक है? क्यों ऐसा कुछ फिलोसफर्स मानते हैं कि पोस्ट हॉक रीजनिंग मतलब जो बाद में की जाए, right? It weakens the claims of moral objectivity. Why do they feel so? Because intuition is always irrational. No, we cannot say that it's not been mentioned in the passage also. We don't say that intuition is irrational. Because moral reasoning is unnecessary in modern society. C statement says because judgments formed before reasoning seem culturally dependent and inconsistent. And D statement says because outcomes are more important than decision making process. So definitely yes, answer is because judgments formed before reasoning seem culturally dependent and inconsistent. That is why some philosophers believe that post hoc reasoning would weaken the claims of moral objectivity. The passage explains that if judgments are intuition based, they may be unstable and culturally contingent. This is what has been explicitly mentioned in the passage, which undermines universal moral objectivity. That makes my option C as the correct answer. Question number 3 says, which of the following best describes the view that intuition may encode evolutionary and social wisdom? Now, look at the question carefully, understand what is it asking. It says, which of the following best describes the view that intuition may encode evolutionary and social wisdom? Intuition की वजह से evolutionary और social wisdom, intuition में evolutionary और social wisdom होता है, it encodes that. Alright, so which of the following talks about it? Intuition should replace moral reasoning entirely. Intuition might reflect adaptive beneficial patterns shaped over time. Intuition is a random emotional response and intuition is superior to reasoning in all moral contexts. When you say intuition is superior to reasoning in all moral contexts, now as I said, generally what happens, students please pay attention to this. Generally it happens that when you are reading a paragraph, especially CLAT के paragraphs की passages की अगर मैं बात करती हूँ या general भी passages की अगर हम बात करें, comparisons, moral judgments, absolute things, they are not there in the paragraph. The author very rarely discusses them, right? So generally the author doesn't talk about the absolute things or the moral judgments or the comparisons. So here we are saying intuition is superior to reasoning in all moral contexts. So this makes my option anyway wrong. Alright, so then you say C वाला option, intuition is a random emotional response. नहीं, ऐसा हमने कहीं पे भी नहीं कहा paragraph में, right? A statement says intuition should replace moral reasoning entirely. No, we said there are two different aspects, right? तो ऐसा हमने नहीं कहा कि intuition should replace the moral reasoning. B statement says intuition might reflect adaptive beneficial patterns shaped over time. Yes, that is true. Because the passage notes that intuitive judgments can be efficient shortcuts shaped by evolution and social experience, right? So question number 3, option B is the correct answer. Students, now we are moving to the next question. The central question raised towards the end of the passage concerns whether moral legitimacy should be based on, okay, let's look at the options. Whether the moral legitimacy should be based on rational procedures or intuitive judgments, individual freedom or societal norms, the process of making a judgment or the consequence of the judgment. Yes, this is the correct answer. And D says emotional intelligence or ethical principles. So all of us know that C is the correct answer to this question. The passage explicitly asks whether legitimacy should rest on how we reach the judgments or how the impact they produce, right? Okay, question number 5 says, which of the following best captures the overall conclusion of the passage? Now, it's asking for the conclusion. Conclusion is anyway given in the passage. Difference between conclusion and inference hota kya hai? Inference is not given and conclusion is given most of the time. So this can be also called a direct inference kind of a question, right? So which of the following best captures the overall conclusion of the passage? So let's understand the options and let's figure out. First says, option A says intuition is unreliable and must be eliminated from the thought. अब देखो must be eliminated, must है यहाँ पे, right? Extreme choice, no, it cannot be my answer. Rational analysis is the only path to ethical legitimacy. Again, I have a limiting adverb only over here. This should not be my answer. Moving ahead, a balance of intuition and reasoning may be necessary for a realistic moral framework. That is what the last paragraph talked about. So yes, C is the correct answer to this question. And D option says moral psychology has proven that Morality is purely subjective. Even if it is subjective or objective, we have nothing to do with it, right? Because our topic is altogether different. So C option, a balance of intuition and reasoning may be necessary for a realistic moral framework, is the correct answer to this question, because the passage concludes by emphasizing the need to reconcile intuitive impulses with reflective reasoning to build a robust moral system. That makes my option C correct. All right, going ahead, चलिए जी, अब लॉ से रिलेटेड एक पैराग्राफ कर लेते हैं फटाफट से, उसके बाद मैं थोड़ा सा आपको स्ट्रेंथनिंग और वीकनिंग के बारे में बताऊंगी, ठीक है? Passage 4. In recent years, a growing debate has emerged around the informal mechanisms through which communities attempt to resolve disputes. While India has a well-defined system of courts, many citizens, particularly in rural and semi-urban regions, continue to rely on community councils, neighborhood committees, and traditional elders for conflict resolution. Supporters argue that these bodies provide quick, inexpensive, and culturally familiar justice. Critics counter that such processes often function without accountability, transparency, and legal safeguards, and may reinforce local power hierarchies. ठीक है? A recurring dilemma. You know what is dilemma? ठीक है? Dilemma means when you are in a confusion. A recurring dilemma arises when an individual, especially someone from a marginalized background, disagrees with the decisions of such a community forum. Formally, they retain the right to approach the courts, but practically a court case may involve costs, delays, and social hostility from neighbors who view going outside the community as an act of disloyalty. As a result, legal rights exist on paper, but exercising them can become socially risky. तो यहाँ पे ये बताया गया है, क्या बताया गया अभी तक, कि अगर कहीं पे भी कोई डिस्प्यूट होता है तो दो तरीके होते हैं, या तो आप कम्युनिटी से रिलेटेड, जैसे आपके कोई भी पंचायत एंड ऑल होते हैं, वहां पे आप अपना रिजॉल्व कर लो प्रॉब्लम कॉन्फ्लिक्ट, ठीक है, या तो आप कोर्ट जाओ. तो दीज आर द टू वेज. बट दे आर सेइंग जो आप कम्युनिटी से रिलेटेड बॉडीज होती हैं, ठीक है, इफ यू गो टू देम एंड इफ यू वांट योर कॉन्फ्लिक्ट्स टू गेट रिजॉल्व देयर, देन व्हाट हैपेंस, दे विल प्रोवाइड यू क्विक, इनएक्सपेंसिव एंड कल्चरली फैमिलियर जस्टिस, ठीक है. पर वहां पे ये होता है कि अगेन इट्स नॉट, इट मे नॉट बी ट्रांसपेरेंट, राइट, इट मे बी बायस्ड. एंड ऑन द अदर हैंड कोर्ट्स आपको हो सकता है अनबायस्ड वर्जन दे, अनबायस्ड एज एन ओपिनियन दे या जजमेंट दे, बट देन इट इन्वॉल्व्स अ लॉट ऑफ कॉस्ट, राइट, इट इन्वॉल्व्स अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम ऑल्सो, ठीक है. एंड स्पेशली इफ यू गो टू द as in those community bodies which will resolve your conflicts, in that case there might be a person who does not rely on them, वो शायद जाना ही नहीं चाहते हैं, ठीक है, जो डिसएग्री करते हैं विद द डिसीजन ऑफ द कम्युनिटी फोरम. सो व्हाट डू यू डू देन, राइट? चलिए जी, आगे चलते हैं. This tension reflects a deeper question. Should justice systems prioritize efficiency and cultural compatibility, or should they insist on due process even at the cost of time? Community forums often rely on consensus rather than evidence. So community forums जो है, they rely on consensus, कि वो सब, जैसे कोई बूढ़े बुजुर्ग वहां पे बैठे हैं, सबसे पूछते हैं, अच्छा आप बताइए क्या होना चाहिए, ऐसे आप बताइए. तो everybody comes up with his or her experience and they come up with a consensus. Okay, this is the kind of punishment that should be given, और ऐसा होना चाहिए इस particular case में, right? They don't rely on evidence. Court relies on evidence. ठीक है? They may prioritize reconciliation over fairness, stability over individual rights, yet courts with all their procedural safeguards can be intimidating, slow and inaccessible. So courts में क्या problem हो सकता है? Courts में जाने के लिए they are inaccessible, they incur a lot of cost, right? और again they can be intimidating, कहीं से threatening आ गया, कुछ आ गया कि भाई अगर आप कोर्ट चले गए तो then you know what are the consequences, right? Moving ahead, some policy makers propose hybrid models. तो अभी क्या होता है, कुछ policy makers क्या करते हैं, they propose hybrid models. State regulated mediation cells staffed by trained facilitators who understand local context but remain accountable to law. ठीक है, तो एक hybrid model वो कह रहे हैं कि आ जाना चाहिए, जहां पे wherein you have the local community also as in participating in it, with probably having the accountability to the courts and the law. Others argue that states should strengthen formal institutions instead of outsourcing justice to community actors. Interestingly, surveys reveal that even when people recognize the limitations of informal forums, they still turn to them first because they perceive the courts as distant and unresponsive. Right? तो कई बार ऐसा भी होता है कि उनको ऐसा लगता है, there are certain people who feel that ये जो forums हैं, ठीक है, जो community forums हैं, इनके कुछ limitations है, but even then for the first run they'll go to these informal forums, ठीक है, rather than moving to the court. Okay, moving ahead, thus the debate is not simply about choosing between traditional and modern systems. It is about understanding how social pressure, unequal power dynamics, and structural barriers shape a person's real freedom to seek justice. तो अगर if you want to seek justice as a human being, as a citizen of any country, if you want to seek justice, right? So how there is social pressure, there is unequal power dynamics, and there are structural barriers which may be a kind of obstacle which may hamper us to seek for the real freedom. Legal rights in this view are meaningful only when individuals can exercise them without fear, stigma and coercion. तो अगर कोई fearless है, daring बंदा है, वही फिर मतलब कोर्ट वोट, maybe he doesn't get intimidated, he know that he is ready to bear the consequences, he might go to the courts in such cases. Otherwise, if he wants to seek the real freedom and real judgment, then probably he has to go beyond the social pressure, go beyond the power dynamics and the structural barriers. That's what the paragraph is talking about. Now let's go to the questions. What is the central concern highlighted by the passage? First option A says that informal justice mechanisms are more effective than courts. They are more effective than courts. Extreme है, नहीं, ऐसा नहीं बताया गया है. That communities should take full responsibility for resolving disputes, that social pressure often limits individuals' ability to exercise legal rights, and that courts are entirely, अब देखो, the courts are entirely inaccessible. Extreme choice हो गया, entirely inaccessible, नहीं, ठीक है. So definitely as my correct answer is option C, which says the social pressures often limit individuals' ability to exercise legal rights. जो हमने last line में पढ़ा, there are some structural barriers, there are some social pressures which may not encourage a person to go to the court of law for seeking justice. Clear है? चलिए जी, next वाला question. According to the passage, supporters of community forums primarily value them. Supporters of community forums primarily value them. किनको? Value the community forums because of what reason? Because they uphold constitutional safeguards, because they deliver quick and culturally familiar resolutions, because they ensure the decisions are free from power impulses, and because they follow strict procedures similar to courts. No, they don't follow procedures similar to courts, not at all. So this cannot be my answer. They uphold constitutional safeguards, not at all. They don't uphold, and it's not as in given in the passage also, nothing to talk about. They deliver quick and culturally familiar resolutions. Yes, that's my answer, option B. And they ensure that decisions are free from power imbalances. They don't ensure that also, right? So option B is the correct answer, because it's explicitly written that supporters highlight quick, inexpensive and culturally familiar justice. Next question says, which statement best reflects the author's likely view on hybrid justice model? Which statement best reflects the author's likely view on hybrid justice models? Let's look at the options. They can balance local sensitivity with legal accountability. They should replace courts entirely. They should replace courts entirely, and they should. Extreme choice, no. They are unnecessary because existing informal systems work well. They are unnecessary. कहीं नहीं बताया गया है, extreme है. They will worsen power. They will worsen power imbalances. कहीं नहीं बताया गया. So option A is the correct answer. Definitely yes. They can balance local sensitivity with legal accountability, and that is why hybrid models should come into practice. All right. Moving ahead, question number 4. What underlying assumption does the passage make about legal rights? What underlying assumption, ठीक है, does the passage make about legal rights? ध्यान से question को पढ़ेंगे. We have to find out the assumption in this case. Rights are meaningful only if they are easy to understand. That is first option. Option B says rights matter only when universally accepted by communities. Rights are effective only when people can exercise them freely, and rights must align with traditional norms. Now, what underlying assumption does the passage make about legal rights? So definitely, yes, rights are effective only when people can exercise them freely, है ना, without fear, without intimidation. So that is what basically the paragraph also talked about. So C should be the correct answer. Yes, option C is the correct answer, which says, okay, the last line states rights are meaningful only when individuals can exercise them without fear, stigma and coercion. ठीक है, कोई इंटिमिडेशन नहीं होना चाहिए, कोई स्टिग्मा नहीं होना चाहिए, कोई फोर्स नहीं होना चाहिए. अगर राइट्स तभी इफेक्टिव होंगे अगर लोग इन चीजों को इजीली और फ्रीली एक्सरसाइज कर पाएंगे. चलिए जी, नेक्स्ट वाला क्वेश्चन says which of the following represents a trap option often seen in CLAT question. Now see, look at this question, a beautiful question I would say. Which of the following represents a trap option often seen in CLAT questions? ठीक है, it's based on this passage only. Now look at this. A choice that exaggerates the author's criticism of community forums. A choice directly supported by a line in the passage. A choice that mildly paraphrases the author's argument, and a choice that discusses the tension between rights and social pressure. Question क्या पूछ रहा है, ध्यान से देखना बच्चा लोग. Question कह रहा है which of the following represents a trap. कौन सा ऐसा ऑप्शन है जो आपको ट्रैप कर रहा है? ठीक है, often seen in the CLAT questions. कि अब इस पैसेज की अगर हम बात करेंगे, a choice that exaggerates the author's criticism of community forums. Right, so definitely yes, this is my answer, because CLAT frequently includes extreme and exaggerated versions of the author's point to mislead students. तो ये आपको ध्यान रखना है. So in the form of question, it has given you one important information about the CLAT test setters. So what do? CLAT frequently includes extreme and exaggerated versions of the author's viewpoint to mislead the students, not misguide, but mislead the students. So these are the trap options. Which options? The extreme choices. Why? Because they want to dodge you. And if you get dodged, you lose 0.25 marks. As simple as that. Alright students, so let's go to the next one. Now CLAT vocabulary. फटाफट से कुछ words देखते हैं हम. What vocabulary does CLAT test? Let's see. No direct vocabulary. Why? Because there are RC, so no direct vocabulary is there. So there is just the context-based vocabulary, right? High frequency question types, word meanings, nearest replacement, phrase interpretation, connotation versus denotation. Just to give you a quick as an understanding of denotation and connotation. Denotation is the literal meaning of the word, the dictionary meaning of the word, and the connotation is the contextual, the figurative meaning of the word. Right? कि आप क्या figure out कर सकते हो. At times there are some metaphorical usages that have that the passage uses. Life is a roller coaster. It's a metaphor, right? So you should be able to figure out the meaning of this metaphor. Life is a roller coaster. Why? With ups and downs probably. ठीक है, चलिए जी next वाले पे चलते हैं. Now let's quickly look at some high utility words which CLAT has used from 2020 to 2024. फटाफट से कुछ 5-10 words हैं. Let's see क्या क्या words हैं. The first word is conflate. अब conflate क्या होता है? Anybody who can give me the answer what is conflate? CONFLATE. फटाफट बच्चा लोग. conflate का मतलब होता है joining two ideas, combining two ideas. That is conflate, right? Combination of two ideas. Let me write it down. Combination of two ideas, two texts, कुछ भी, ठीक है, that is called conflation. Two ideas or texts. Alright. Detractor. कौन होता है detractor? Detractor मतलब a person who tries to belittle you, जो आपको नीचा दिखाने की कोशिश करे, right? One who tries to as in show that you are less important. One who tries to disparage you. So you can say a disparager or one who belittles you, one who criticizes you. Not you, anyone per se. You can say a critic, right? Okay, espouse. Now these are some of the words which have been seen in CLAT for past few years, right? Espouse का क्या मतलब होता है? Espouse का मतलब होता है support करना, You can say support, you can say embrace. To marry also, spouse ko hum, when you marry somebody, that's also called espousal at times, right? Now the next word is frivolous. You know what is frivolous? Frivolous is something which is not serious. You can say not serious or non-serious. That is frivolous. ठीक है, बहुत छोटी सी चीज जो बहुत सीरियस नहीं है, जो इनसिग्निफिकेंट है. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट वर्ड क्या है? परनिशियस. परनिशियस क्या होता है? एनीबडी? परनिशियस का मतलब होता है डेंजरस. ओके, सो यू कैन नोट डाउन दीज वर्ड्स. सरमाइज. सरमाइज का मतलब होता है कंजक्चर, गेस. The police team or the policeman surmised that the person was murdered. ठीक है, they surmised that the person was murdered. Why? Because जो उनको क्राइम सीन पे मिला, उनको लगा, उन्होंने गेस करा कि मर्डर हुआ है. ठीक है, चलिए जी, नेक्स्ट वाला वर्ड इज proliferate. Proliferation of cells. You must have studied about it. Proliferation of cells. जैसे cells हमारे अंदर proliferate करती हैं, है ना, वो increase होती हैं day by day. तो proliferation is increase basically. Okay, next word is mitigate. Mitigate मतलब किसी पेन को या किसी अनप्लेजेंट सिचुएशन को कम करना. ठीक है, एलिविएट करना. सो यू कैन से एलिविएट. ALLEVIATE. मिटिगेट मतलब कोई भी अनप्लेजेंट सिचुएशन है, कोई भी पेन है, ठीक है, उसको आप मिटिगेट कर रहे हो, तो मतलब उस पेन को आप कम कर रहे हो. ठीक है, उसको वर्सन नहीं कर रहे हो, उसको कम कर रहे हो. आर यू गेटिंग इट? एग्रावेट होता तो यू आर वर्सनिंग दैट. So aggravate is the opposite of mitigate. Ambivalent. Now, ambi is a root word which many a time the teachers talk about this root word in the class. It is generally used as a prefix. Ambi means on both sides. ठीक है, तो ambivalent क्या होगा? Ambivalent होगा something that is as a not clear, something that is ambiguous. ठीक है, कोई भी चीज जो एम्बिगुअस है, जो क्लियर नहीं है, जो ऑब्स्क्योर है, which lacks clarity. Why? Because it's ambivalent on both sides. And next word is assertive. You know what is assertive, right? So you have that firmness, right? You know what you're saying. You're firm in that. So assertion. So these are some of the words which have been seen in past 3-4 years. So I wanted to come up with these words. These are the 10 words, right? Okay, now moving to the next slide. Why CR matters in CLAT RC. फटाफट से इसको करते हैं हम. Why CR matters in CLAT RC. CR मतलब critical reasoning, RC मतलब reading comprehension. As I said, nowadays in CLAT RC, CR is embedded, right? So we need to understand that. क्यों ऐसा होता है? Critical reasoning जो है, critical reasoning का मतलब है how well you can process, evaluate and infer from the complex arguments. ठीक है, दैट इज क्रिटिकल रीजनिंग. कि आपका क्रिटिकल बेंट ऑफ माइंड है, आप कैसे इवेल्युएट करते हो सिचुएशंस को, आप कैसे इन्फर करते हो चीजों को, आपको कैसे पता चलता है कि इम्प्लिसिट इन्फॉर्मेशन क्या है, राइट? यू नीड टू हैव दैट क्रिटिकल बेंट ऑफ माइंड, राइट? नाउ आरसी इज नॉट अबाउट फैक्ट्स. वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड दिस. इट्स अबाउट द आर्ग्यूमेंट्स. व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट सीआर पैसेजेस, वो आर्ग्यूमेंट्स होते हैं जिसमें प्रेमिस होता है, assumption होता है, ठीक है, एंड इट गिव्स यू द कंक्लूजन. Moving ahead, अब देखो RC is not about facts. So what is it about? It's about the claims, the premises, the assumptions, the conclusions. It's about arguments. So all these things make an argument. जिसमें premise होगा, ठीक है, जिसमें एक assumption होगा, assumption is an unstated premise, right? जिसमें एक conclusion होगा, उस पूरी चीज को, उस पूरे paragraph को हम argument कहेंगे, right? So argument has all these things. Okay, next is inference and application questions are pure CR. So whenever you talk about inference-based questions, application-based questions, they are pure CR questions, and that is why I told you in the very beginning they might be a little difficult, so you can keep them aside. Or the better way is that you can hone yourself in such a manner. आप इतना इसकी practice कर सकते हैं कि you should be the ones to do tone-based and inference-based questions at the first place, right? अब देखो, इट टेस्ट योर एबिलिटी टू ड्रॉ लॉजिकल लिंक्स, नॉट जस्ट योर एबिलिटी टू रिमेंबर लाइंस ऑफ द पैसेज। कि आपको मेमोराइज नहीं करना है कि पैराग्राफ में क्या लिखा गया था। सो एक्सप्लिसिट इन्फॉर्मेशन तो इज एनीवे देयर, you don't need to memorize that. Why? Because if you want to, as I said, confirm and reconfirm your answer, you will anyway go back to the paragraph and find out the answer. ठीक है, लेकिन inference draw करने के लिए you need to have that ability to draw the logical links, right? And how will that come? Definitely is with practice. ठीक है, चलिए जी, next क्या कह रहा है? Eliminating trap options require CR. अगर आपको trap options को eliminate करना है, you need to have a good critical reasoning, critical bent of mind. CLAT deliberately places partially true options, half true options जो हमने किया था, emotionally appealing options, right? Extreme and over generalized options. So we have already discussed it in at length a while ago. Options that distort causal links, and only students with CR training can filter these traps. Okay, legal passages demand structured reasoning. Legal passages, आप law aspirants हो, so it demands you, it demands structured reasoning. Even though RC is not legal, understand this, even though RC is not legal, the future law student must show ability to analyze competing viewpoints. Because you are the future law student, so you should have the ability to compete the viewpoints, to analyze the competing viewpoints. You should have the ability to evaluate evidence. You should have the ability to recognize the flawed reasoning, right? So this is what CR tests. Is that clear? So that is why CR is very important, and that is why RC in CLAT is now CR based. Because the future as a law student, an aspirant, a law aspirant, he or she needs to evaluate evidence, he or she needs to recognize the flaws in the reasoning, he or she needs to analyze the as in competing viewpoints of the persons. All right, so next, CR improves accuracy even when the passage is unfamiliar. How? A student who understands arguments rather than just memorizing lines can handle any kind of passage, may it be science passage, may it be philosophy, may it be sociology, may it be economics, may it be anything, because reasoning skills transfer across topics, right? So now you cannot say that मैम साइंस का पैसेज था, फिलोसफी का था, इकोनॉमिक्स का था, साइकोलॉजी का था, मैं नहीं कर पाया, नहीं कर पाई. Why? Because you are a law aspirant. So reasoning skill is something that transfers across these subjects, across these topics, so you cannot deny the fact, right? Okay, in short, CR is the engine that drives CLAT RC, and without CR, RC is a guesswork. Remember that. And with CR, RC becomes predictable and logical. And if there is something logical and if there is something predictable, a piece of text which is in front of you, I don't suppose that there should be anything that as in stops you to answer the questions correctly and appropriately. All right, students, going to the next one, let's understand why CR matters. Okay, there is this paragraph. Okay, now more than a paragraph, it's again a piece of information. So let's read it quickly. Very quickly we'll do that. The role of reasoning skills in modern examinations. That is the topic. So as I said, it's a piece of information for you. So let's read it quickly. In recent years, competitive examinations have shifted from testing memorized knowledge to evaluating reasoning abilities. Many education experts argue that this change is long overdue. They believe that the ability to reason, especially to infer unstated ideas, identify assumptions, and evaluate arguments is more reliable indicator of long-term academic success than the ability to recall information. So nowadays, CR is something which everybody is looking for, okay? Even the competitive exams are looking for the critical reasoning abilities of a student. All right. However, this shift has also generated criticism. Okay, some teachers claim that reasoning heavy papers disadvantage students who come from schools where reading culture is weak. Others assert reasoning is a teachable skill and therefore does not reflect natural ability. And a third group argues that reasoning without sufficient factual knowledge may lead to superficial understanding. Now there's a criticism also. ठीक है, कोई लोग इस चीज को criticize भी कर रहे हैं. क्यों? Because some people say that अगर reasoning heavy, reasoning laid कोई text है, So all those people, all those students who have come from some backgrounds wherein reading was not inculcated in them from the very beginning, so they won't be able to reason out the things very easily. Others say that reasoning, it's a teachable skill, you can teach it at any point of time, right? So it's not a natural ability, so why such a as an fuss about it? Then third group says that reasoning without the factual knowledge, it leads to the superficial understanding. So you need to have the factual knowledge to understand something and to probably interpret or to probably reason it out, right? Okay, despite these criticisms, examination bodies defend the shift by insisting that modern professions demand reasoning based decision making, right? They point out that real life situations, individuals rarely have access to complete information. Instead, they must draw conclusions from limited data. As third group said that without the factual knowledge you cannot reason out the things, but these people, they are saying that with the limited knowledge, right, you should be able to draw the conclusion. You cannot have the ample information about each and everything, and that is nowadays what the examination bodies are asking for, nowadays what the modern professionals are demanding, right? So ultimately, what do they say? Moreover, the rise of misinformation has made it critical for young people to evaluate claims rather than accept them blindly. So even if you have ample information, you don't know whether that's information or that's misinformation. So you should have that maybe discretion of knowing that what is right and what is wrong, right? So moving ahead, interestingly, research comparing traditional knowledge-based exams with reasoning-based exams shows that the latter means the reasoning-based exam over here, create less room for rote learning and coaching shortcuts. Students who rely heavily on memorized templates or pre-learned answers perform poorly on reasoning tasks, while those who engage deeply with the ideas tend to score better. This examination designers claim promotes academic integrity and fairness. Thus, although the transition has faced resistance, it appears that emphasis on reasoning is likely to continue. What remains uncertain is whether schools and coaching systems will adapt fast enough to prepare students for this new landscape. तो मतलब ये चीज तो रहने वाली है, reasoning तो रहेगी, but what we cannot surely say is that whether the coaching institutes or the schools will adapt this as in critical reasoning in their curriculum fast enough or not. All right, next question number 1, which of the following best states the author's main argument? ठीक है, चलिए जी फटाफट देखते हैं. Reasoning based exams are unfair to students from weak reading backgrounds. Reasoning based exams better reflect the skills needed in modern society. Traditional exams were more effective in testing factual knowledge, and coaching institutes should change their teaching style. Now last one is बिल्कुल ही irrelevant, out of the scope. They should change their coaching teaching style. क्या फर्क पड़ रहा है, कर रहे हैं या नहीं कर रहे हैं? So it says which of the following best states the author's main argument? So definitely yes, when you say reasoning based exams better reflect the skills needed in the modern society, that is what the paragraph talks about. अगर criticism भी है तब भी वो ultimately यही कह रहे हैं कि modern professionals, जो modern profession है, it asks for, it demands the reasoning skills to be the students with good reasoning skills, right? So that is the demand of the hour. So B becomes the correct answer. Thus, moving ahead, the critics of reasoning heavy exams believe that, क्या बोलते हैं वो, कि अगर रीजनिंग हैवी पेपर है तो क्या होगा? Such exams promote deep engagement with ideas. Reasoning can be taught. Reasoning without facts is meaningless, and either B or C represents their concern. Okay, the critics of reasoning heavy exams believe that such exams promote engagement. नहीं, promote word नहीं हम यूज करेंगे. क्यों? अब देखो क्वेश्चन क्या पूछ रहा है, द क्रिटिक्स ऑफ. अगर कोई क्रिटिक्स है, अगर कोई क्रिटिक कर रहा है किसी चीज को, तो वो प्रमोट तो कर नहीं सकता, राइट? सो ए कैन नॉट बी माई आंसर. बी सेज रीजनिंग कैन बी टॉट. दिस इज समथिंग व्हिच those people said that yes, it's a teachable skill, right? So B is correct. C says reasoning without facts is meaningless. Yes, they said that if you don't have the factual information, you cannot reason it out, and even if you do, that's useless, right? जिस पे फिर काउंटर करके लास्ट में बोला गया था कि छोटे से डेटा में से आपको रीजन आउट करनी पड़ेगी चीजें. यू कैन नॉट ब्लाइंडली एज एन rely on every piece of information, right? So C is also correct. So we can say either B or C represents their concerns. Yes, so option D is the correct answer. Critics argue reasoning is teachable and it's not a natural ability, and that reasoning without facts is shallow. Okay, question number 3 क्या कह रहा है? Which of the following, if true, would strengthen the examination body's defense? So what was the examination body's defense? ठीक है, तो कौन सी चीज उसको सपोर्ट करेगी, स्ट्रेंथन करेगी? सर्वे शो स्टूडेंट्स प्रेफर मेमोराइजेशन ओवर एनालिसिस. नो, सर्वेज डोंट शो दैट. एम्प्लॉयर्स रिपोर्ट दैट ओल्ड ग्रेजुएट्स स्ट्रगल विद इंडिपेंडेंट थिंकिंग. अब देखो, अगर हम बोलते हैं ओल्ड ग्रेजुएट्स स्ट्रगल विद इंडिपेंडेंट थिंकिंग, ठीक है, दैट मीन्स कि जो न्यू ग्रेजुएट्स हैं, जो मॉडर्न प्रोफेशंस हैं, वो क्या कह रहे हैं कि क्रिटिकल रीजनिंग, क्रिटिकल बेंट ऑफ माइंड होना चाहिए, क्रिटिकल रीजनिंग आनी चाहिए, राइट? सो दिस इज समथिंग प्रॉब्ली विच वुड स्ट्रेंथन द examination body's defense. Students from elite schools perform best. Elite schools perform best. नहीं, this is not given. Elite schools की कहीं बात नहीं हुई. Coaching centers have begun to teach reasoning. No, they say that we are not sure that how fast they'll be able to adapt to this, right? So B becomes the correct answer to this question. Yes, this supports the claim that reasoning skills are needed in the modern professions. Clear है बच्चा लोग? चलिए जी next वाले पे आते हैं. The author refers to the rise of misinformation primarily to do what? Primarily to argue that the student should focus more on current affairs. Nahi. Illustrate the real world importance of evaluating claims. Yes, that could be my answer. Show that memorization is still useful. No. Rote learning के बारे में वो बोल रहे हैं कि नहीं, वो traditional way है. Support the criticism that reasoning requires factual knowledge. Not really. So I suppose B should be the correct answer. Yes, let's see. Yes, the author uses misinformation to highlight why evaluating arguments matters. So the author refers to the rise of misinformation primarily to illustrate the real world importance of evaluating claims. ठीक है बच्चा लोग, clear हो रहा है? I suppose I am making sense. Yes or no? Okay, great. चलिए जी next वाले पे चलते हैं. Question number 5 says, what can be inferred about the traditional knowledge-based exams? They encourage surface level learning. Yes, they do encourage surface level learning, rote learning जिसको हम बोलते हैं, ठीक है? एक होता है memorization by heart, एक होता है rote learning, रट्टा मारना जिसको आप बोलते हो. So yes, first one is correct as per the paragraph. Second says they were more fair. They were more fair. Again, extreme choice. No. They tested reasoning more effectively. No. They were preferred by examination bodies. नहीं, ऐसा कहीं नहीं बताया गया. So option A is the correct answer. Yes. Let's see. Sorry. Yes, option A is the correct answer. The passage states that knowledge-based exams allowed rote learning and coaching shortcuts. Right? Okay, moving ahead. चलो अभी फटाफट से देखते हैं कि strengthening the argument और weakening the argument. Assumption, strengthening the argument, weakening the argument. So we should know this. फटाफट से कुछ एक छोटे-छोटे exercises करते हैं, and then maybe another 10 or 15 minutes we'll wind up with the session. So students, I am very thankful to you that अभी तक आपने cooperate करा, अभी भी आप अगले 10-15-20 मिनट मेरे साथ cooperate करेंगे. I am very sure about that, right? So let's start. What counts as strengthening? ठीक है, ध्यान से देखेंगे. A statement strengthens an argument when it, I have given you 2-3 options. ठीक है, 2-3 चीजें आपको बता रही हूँ, आप ध्यान से देखेंगे. When it adds evidence that supports the author's conclusion. ठीक है, एक आर्ग्यूमेंट को कौन सी चीज सपोर्ट करेगी? जो उसके कंक्लूजन को सपोर्ट करेगी. So anything that adds evidence that supports the author's conclusion will definitely strengthen the argument. ठीक है. Next, anything that confirms an assumption the argument depends on will definitely strengthen the argument. देखो, just try to understand. You must have studied it in your logical reasoning. देखो, जो critical reasoning आप करते हो, इनफैक्ट जो premise होता है, ठीक है, premise plus premise, एक premise हो सकता है, 2 हो सकते हैं, 3 हो सकते हैं, ठीक है, premise plus premise gives us conclusion. ठीक है, इस पूरी चीज को आप बोलते हो argument. So what is premise? Premise is a fact that is given to you, right? अब देखो, premise plus dash gives you conclusion. And what is this dash? जो मैंने यहाँ पे dash डाला है. I say P means premise plus P means another premise, ठीक है? I say plus dash. Now I have put a dash over here, blank over here, and then I say all this gives me a conclusion, and the entire thing is called an argument. अब ये P तो premise है, premise is a fact, a statement which is mentioned there explicitly, right? अब ये dash जो है ये क्या है, ये भी एक premise है, but it's not stated in the paragraph, so it is called an assumption. So what is an assumption? Assumption is simply a premise. ठीक है, तो अगर कोई assumption है, ठीक है, अगर anything as in that confirms an assumption, the argument depends on, will definitely strengthen my argument. Why? Because premise और premise मिला के मेरा conclusion बनाता है, और अगर उसमें मैं assumption भी जोड़ दूंगी तो वो validate करेगा ना उस conclusion को, that will validate the conclusion. Try to understand, right? So that means anything that confirms an assumption the argument depends on will strengthen my argument. I suppose I am making sense. Third point says removes doubts or alternative explanation. Any option that removes doubts, जो किसी भी alternative explanation को या किसी डाउट को खत्म कर देता है मेरे दिमाग से, वो मेरे आर्गुमेंट को स्ट्रेंथन करेगा, मेरे कंक्लूजन को स्ट्रेंथन करेगा. नेक्स्ट सेज shows the reasoning is more reliable than it first seemed. Just a moment, let me erase this. Just a moment, students. ठीक है, तो आप ये ध्यान से देखेंगे, and in short it makes the conclusion more likely to be true. ठीक है, कोई भी ऐसी चीज जो मेरे कंक्लूजन को और ज्यादा वैलिडेट करती है और ज्यादा सही बनाती है, दैट विल स्ट्रेंथन माय आर्गुमेंट. ठीक है, अभी फटाफट से देखते हैं स्ट्रेंथनिंग के कुछ आई हैव गिवन यू एक दो लाइंस, उस पे हम देखेंगे कैसे स्ट्रेंथन कर सकते हैं. Let's understand that. What is the argument over here? Argument over here is, students please pay attention to this. This will help you out really, right? If you pay attention to this. As I said, another 15 minutes maybe. Daily meditation improves academic performance because it reduces stress. तो ये मेरा argument है. मेरा argument क्या है कि daily meditation improves academic performance. ठीक है, क्यों? क्योंकि ये stress को रिड्यूस करता है. अगर मैं रोज मेडिटेट करूंगी तो रिड्यूस हो जाएगा स्ट्रेस, उससे मेरा एकेडमिक परफॉर्मेंस अच्छा होगा. दिस इज एन आर्ग्यूमेंट. नाउ लेट मी कम डाउन. कंक्लूजन कहता है डेली मेडिटेशन इंप्रूव्स एकेडमिक परफॉर्मेंस. अब इस आर्ग्यूमेंट में कंक्लूजन क्या है? डेली मेडिटेशन इंप्रूव्स एकेडमिक परफॉर्मेंस. ठीक है, और प्रेमिस क्या है? प्रेमिस मतलब रीजन. ठीक है, इसका रीजन में क्या दे रही हूं? इट रिड्यूसेस स्ट्रेस. ठीक है, बिकॉज ये स्ट्रेस को रिड्यूस करता है. नाउ व्हाट स्ट्रेंथन्स दिस आर्गुमेंट? एग्जांपल 1, अगर मैं बोलती हूँ, अ स्टडी ऑफ 5000 स्टूडेंट्स फाउंड दैट दोज हु मेडिटेटेड डेली स्कोर्ड हायर देन दोज हु डिड नॉट. अब ये जो है ये तो डायरेक्टली मेरे कंक्लूजन को वैलिडेट कर रहा है ना. मेरा कंक्लूजन कह रहा है डेली मेडिटेशन इंप्रूव्स एकेडमिक परफॉर्मेंस, एंड आई हैव गिवन एन एग्जांपल व्हिच सेज a study of 5000 students found that those who meditated daily scored higher. So this is directly validating my conclusion, right? So definitely yes, it will strengthen my conclusion. ठीक है, ये clear है. अब देखो, as I said, it supports the conclusion directly, so it strengthens the conclusion. That is one way to find it out. So anything that validates your conclusion will support your argument, will strengthen your argument. One way. Another way, as I said, देखो दूसरा example क्या है? Reduced stress has been scientifically linked to better concentration and memory. अब दूसरा एग्जाम्पल कहता है reduced stress has been scientifically linked to better concentration and memory. अब देखो ये it confirms the assumption that stress अगर कम होगा तो ये परफॉर्मेंस को बढ़ाएगा. ना जो चीज मेरे assumption को वैलिडेट करेगी वो कंक्लूजन को वैलिडेट करेगी, क्योंकि actually assumption is as an unsaid premise, it's a hidden premise, right? तो हमने बोला reduced stress has been scientifically linked to better concentration and memory. ठीक है, that means reduced stress is equal to better performance. That is what the paragraph says. ठीक है, तो ये मेरा आंसर हो सकता है. नेक्स्ट, स्ट्रेंथनिंग एग्जांपल 3. मेडिटेशन हैज नो नेगेटिव साइड इफेक्ट्स एंड हार्मफुल कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस. आप देखो, अब आप बोलोगे ये कैसे स्ट्रेंथन करेगा मेरे एज एन आर्गुमेंट को? इफ आई से मेडिटेशन हैज नो नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट, इट डजंट हैव एनी हार्मफुल कॉन्सिक्वेंसेस, राइट? तो ये मेरे आर्गुमेंट को कैसे स्ट्रेंथन करेगा? ये मेरे आर्गुमेंट को ऐसे स्ट्रेंथन करेगा बिकॉज मेरे माइंड में से जो भी डाउट्स थे वो सब खत्म हो गए कि भाई मेडिटेशन का कोई नेगेटिव इम्पैक्ट नहीं है, ठीक है। सो दैट मीन्स इट रिमूव्स माई ऑल्टरनेटिव डाउट्स। तो जो भी चीज मेरे ऑल्टरनेटिव डाउट्स को रिमूव कर रही है वो भी मेरे पैराग्राफ को, मेरे आर्गुमेंट को स्ट्रेंथन कर रही है, ठीक है स्टूडेंट्स। आई सपोज आई एम मेकिंग सेंस। नाउ मूविंग अहेड, व्हाट काउंट्स एज वीकनिंग। एक एग्जांपल ले लेते हैं फटाफट से। A statement weakens an argument when it gives evidence that contradicts the conclusion. कोई भी चीज which goes against my conclusion will go against my argument, thus weakening my argument as a whole. Alright, shows an assumption is false. देखो अगर assumption सही है तो conclusion सही होगा, conclusion validate होगा। अगर assumption ही गलत है तो वो कंक्लूजन को वैलिडेट नहीं करेगा। जो चीज कंक्लूजन को वैलिडेट नहीं करेगी वो मेरे आर्गुमेंट को सपोर्ट कर ही नहीं सकती है, राइट। सो एनीथिंग व्हेन आई सी दैट एन assumption is false, that means it will weaken my overall argument because it weakens my conclusion by not validating it. Next, offers an alternative explanation, and next shows exceptions and counter examples. Attacks the reasoning, not the facts in the passage. ठीक है। In short, it makes the conclusion less likely to be true. Strengthening makes the conclusion more likely to be true. Now, this makes the conclusion less likely to be true. ठीक है, क्लियर है। चलिए जी, अब यही वाला जो एग्जाम्पल था मेडिटेशन वाला, इसमें हम देखते हैं वीकनिंग क्या हो सकता है। What weakens this argument? Weakening example 1. Most students who meditate daily also attend extra coaching classes. हम बोल रहे हैं, हमने बोला मेडिटेशन से हमारा परफॉर्मेंस इंप्रूव होगा, ठीक है, क्योंकि वो स्ट्रेस को रिड्यूस करता है तो हमारा परफॉर्मेंस जो है इंप्रूव होगा। अब यहाँ पे हम बोल रहे हैं मोस्ट स्टूडेंट्स हु मेडिटेट डेली, जो डेली मेडिटेट भी करते हैं वो क्या करते हैं, दे आल्सो अटेंड एक्स्ट्रा कोचिंग क्लासेस। सो दिस मीन्स कि भाई सिर्फ मेडिटेशन से नहीं, हो सकता है एक्स्ट्रा कोचिंग क्लासेस अटेंड करने से मेरा स्कोर इंप्रूव हो रहा है। सो दिस इज गिविंग मी एन ऑल्टरनेटिव ऑप्शन, ये मुझे एक ऑल्टरनेटिव दे रहा है, ठीक है। जो मेरे ऑल्टरनेटिव्स को रिमूव करेगा वो स्ट्रेंथन करेगा आर्गुमेंट को, जो मुझे ऑल्टरनेटिव दे रहा है वो वीकन करेगा ना आर्गुमेंट को। आर यू गेटिंग इट? सो इट गिव्स मी एन ऑल्टरनेटिव कॉज फॉर गुड परफॉर्मेंस, एंड व्हाट इज दैट ऑल्टरनेटिव कॉज? दैट those students who meditate daily, they also attend the coaching classes. So it's not only because of meditation they are scoring well, maybe it's because of the coaching as in classes they are scoring well, ठीक है। तो ये वीकन करके आर्गुमेंट को। नेक्स्ट देखते हैं एग्जांपल। A survey shows that daily meditation does not significantly reduce stress in students, ठीक है। तो ये पूरा डायरेक्टली की लिंक को अटैक कर रहा है। A survey shows that daily meditation does not significantly reduce stress in students. हमने बोला मेडिटेशन करने से परफॉर्मेंस बढ़ेगा क्योंकि स्ट्रेस रिड्यूस होता है मेडिटेशन करने से, पर ये कहता है कि डेली मेडिटेशन सिग्निफिकेंटली स्ट्रेस को रिड्यूस नहीं कर रही है, तो ये तो की लिंक को अटैक कर रहे हैं, तो इट विल डेफिनेटली वीकन माय व्हाट आर्गुमेंट, द कंक्लूजन। नेक्स्ट, वीकनिंग एग्जांपल 3. स्टूडेंट्स हु मेडिटेट डेली परफॉर्म द सेम एज दोज हु डोंट. सो व्हेन यू से students who meditate daily they perform the same as those who do not meditate daily, तो फिर वो कॉन्ट्राडिक्ट वैसे ही कर रहा है ना कि भाई जो मेडिटेशन की वजह से परफॉर्मेंस इंप्रूव नहीं हो रहा है, क्योंकि जो नहीं मेडिटेट कर रहा है वो भी वैसा ही कर रहे हैं, है ना। सो दिस इज अ डायरेक्ट, यू कैन से दिस इज डायरेक्टली कॉन्ट्राडिक्टिंग द कंक्लूजन, thus contradicting my whole argument, thus weakening my whole argument, ठीक है बच्चा लोग। चलिए जी, प्रीवियस ईयर के भी कुछ हमारे पास एज इन पैसेजेस हैं, but this you can find on your as in Google also. So last May I just want to give you one last tip. Okay, let me come to that quick. Okay, this was the last question. All right, now you have just 10 to 12 days or 13-14 days at your disposal, right? So final tips क्या है? फाइनल 10 डे प्रिपरेशन प्लान क्या है? रीड 3 एडिटोरियल्स डेली। अभी आप बोलोगे अभी इसका क्या फायदा होगा? पढ़ो यार, पढ़ के देखो, ठीक है, कूल हो जाओ, पढ़ के देखो, क्योंकि आपको रीडिंग कॉम्प्रिहेंशन ही करना है क्लैट में, वीए में, और कुछ नहीं करना है, ठीक है। तो 3 एडिटोरियल्स रोज पढ़ो अगले 10 दिन में, एटलीस्ट 3 एडिटोरियल्स रोज। एंड एज आई सेड, जस्ट फाइंड आउट कि कहाँ पे लिमिटिंग एडवर्ब्स है, क्या फ्रेजेस हैं, क्या टोन हो सकता है, ठीक है। जस्ट ट्राई टू डू दैट। देन build active reading, summarize each paragraph. हर पैराग्राफ के बाद देखो कि पैराग्राफ एक लाइन में मुझे क्या कह रहा है बेसिकली, ठीक है. Then next, practice elimination, POE, as I said, process of elimination. While doing the questions, practice elimination, and I gave you ample examples and ample ways to eliminate. Extreme choices को eliminate करेंगे, half truths, half options को eliminate करेंगे, moral judgments को eliminate करेंगे, over generalizations को eliminate करेंगे, ठीक है. So I have given you ample things to delete or to eliminate the options which you feel should not be my answer, ठीक है. And finally you will reach the appropriate answer, that's for sure. Mark common traps, ठीक है. टाइम ट्रैप्स क्या है? रीरीडिंग द पैसेज, पैसेज रिग्रेशन. हमने एक पैराग्राफ पढ़ा, दूसरे पे आ गए, फिर पिछले पे चले गए, फिर तीसरे पे आए, फिर दूसरे पे चले गए. दैट्स कॉल्ड पैसेज रिग्रेशन. अवॉइड डूइंग दैट बिकॉज दैट्स कंज्यूमिंग योर टाइम, राइट. देन नेक्स्ट, डेली आरसी प्लान, मिनी मॉक शेड्यूल. So do all these things in last 10 days, right? Keeping all the things in mind which we have discussed today in today's class. And I'm very sure if you were attentive in the class, even if you were not attentive in the class, thankfully it's on YouTube. Anytime you can just hit the button and just check it out there, right? आप pause कर सकते हो, देख सकते हो कि कहाँ पे कौन सी चीज बोली गई. And believe me, इसमें से अगर आप 40%, 50% भी grab कर पाओगे, it's going to help you increase your score in VA. Right now, one last tip before I wind up. Just one last tip. Okay. Before I wind up, बच्चा लोग, one last tip. कुछ students अभी भी उनके दिमाग में एक चीज होगी कि accuracy तो ठीक है, because nowadays it's accuracy. It's not about speed reading, right? It's about understanding and accuracy. But still, we need speed in the examinations. Why? Because I have 25 questions more or less in my VA section, and I have more or less 25 minutes only. Are you getting it? So how do I increase my speed? अभी मैं आपको एक सिंपल सा फंडा बोलती हूँ, अगर आप अगले 10 दिन में ये करोगे, ठीक है. Now tell me, all of you watch C dramas, all of you watch K dramas. आपकी लैंग्वेज में बात कर रही हूँ मैं, ठीक है. I'm talking to Gen Z, right? So you watch C dramas, you watch K dramas, you watch animes, है ना? करते हो ना watch. अभी देखो, there are two ways to watch it. One way is कि आप dubbed version देखते हो, you watch the dubbed versions. Right? Another way is that you look at the subtitles. एक होता है dub version, एक होता है sub version. So I would recommend all of you to go for the sub version, not the dub version. Why? I'll tell you. It's going to help you improve your reading speed. कैसे? देखो, आप अगर dubbed version में जा रहे हो, आपका कोई कोरियन ड्रामा है तो आपने उसको हिंदी में डब करके देख लिया, ठीक है. या आपका कोई चाइनीज ड्रामा है, सी ड्रामा है, आपने उसको हिंदी में डब करके देख लिया, तो आप सुन रहे हो, ठीक है. बट अगर आप उसको के ड्रामा को उसी लैंग्वेज में रहने दो, सी ड्रामा को उसी लैंग्वेज में रहने दो. एनिमे की अगर हम बात करें, I am not sure how many of you have watched Death Note. I have watched that personally and I loved that. Anyway, so अगर हम ये चीजें वॉच कर रहे हैं in the actual language, but हमने subtitles as an on कर रखे हैं. So now see what happens when that particular person is delivering a dialogue in his or her own language, which anyway I am not able to understand. कोरियन ड्रामा है तो मैं अंडरस्टैंड नहीं कर पाऊंगी what the person is saying, right? बट अगर मैं वो सबटाइटल पढ़ रही हूँ, डायलॉग चेंज होगा, सबटाइटल भी चेंज होगा, राइट? सो इट वोंट गिव मी मच टाइम. आर यू गेटिंग मी? सो मैं उस सबटाइटल को देखूंगी, राइट? और फटाफट से उसको गैदर करने की कोशिश करूंगी. आई ट्राई टू एक्सट्रैक्ट द इंफॉर्मेशन फ्रॉम दैट सबटाइटल. सो दिस विल हेल्प मी एज एन एनहांस माई वोकैबुलरी ऑल्सो. दिस विल हेल्प मी speed read also. This will help me in enhancing my reading speed. Why? Because I know that I have maybe 10 seconds or 5 seconds to gather the information from this dialogue, or rather to read it, right? क्योंकि मुझे उसका लैंग्वेज तो वैसे ही नहीं समझ आ रहा है, तो मुझे समझने के लिए सबटाइटल तो समझना पड़ेगा. मेकिंग सेंस? सो इट माइट सीम कि अरे क्या बोल रहे हैं, लेकिन आप करके देखो, इससे आपका रीडिंग स्पीड बिल्कुल अच्छे से इंक्रीज होएगा, ठीक है स्टूडेंट्स? So this was it for today, and I know, as I said in the very beginning, that you have practiced well, but believe me, in last 10 to 12 days, if you do whatever we discussed today in the class, I can guarantee you at least you can say 30 to 50% increase in your scores. I can guarantee you that. But yes, as in provided that you have listened and watched it carefully. Right? So wish you all the best, students. God bless you all. Do well, and we'll meet again when you will come up with flying colors in your CLAT examination. Bye-bye. Take care. God bless you all. Bye.